Chapter 1635. Before Zhang Yan entered the world, he was going to meet the disciples of the sect after a discussion with the Jinjin in the sect, and then arrange for the closing of the myriad world. However, after entering the world, he sensed that a few disciples were working hard to cultivate according to the secret method he had taught them in the past. This was definitely not a good thing, so he sent a spiritual opportunity to them and told them not to come out to greet him. After they finished cultivating, they would come back to the Tianqing Hall. As for the meteorite that Qi Yuntian had mentioned, it was only a matter of time before the results would come out. After some consideration, he decided to deal with this matter first. Thus, his thoughts turned, and when he reappeared, he was already outside the formation that trapped the meteorite. There was a strong vitality lingering here, as if there was a huge living creature that was ready to move, but with his arrival, it became silent, as if it did not dare to move again. He took a look from the outside, then walked in. At this moment, he was just a weak incarnation of his will. Just now, the Yuan Qi that he brought had already been released, and his Qi dynamic was not very high. At this moment, he did not deliberately reflect his appearance into people's hearts, so although there were many disciples guarding the formation, they did not notice his arrival. Not long after, he came to the front of one of the meteorites. This object was surrounded by a dense mist, and the cultivators who came to investigate before, no matter what method they used, could not remove it, so they could not see the true appearance of the meteorite. They could only judge by the Qi dynamic that came from the meteorite, but this may not be true. If the meteorite was a living creature with its own consciousness, it could also be an illusion that it deliberately released. Zhang Yan would not be blocked by this. He looked over and immediately saw everything clearly. The surface of this meteorite was extremely smooth, and there were many air holes around it, about 300 in total. It was as tall as a mountain, as big as the sea. If placed in the virtual sky, it would be a little bigger than the ordinary Earth star. Fortunately, the mountains, seas, and land were boundless, and the place where it fell was close to the north, so it was rarely visited by people. If it was not for the huge movement and the fact that it broke through the heaven and earth, Qinsong School may not have sent their disciples to such a faraway land. It was hard to imagine that such a large thing could crash into the continent without causing many casualties. However, as far as he was concerned, it was inevitable. In fact, it could be said that the creature had intentionally avoided him, which was why it had ended up like this. After all, it was intimately connected to the living beings of the mountain and sea realm. In fact, it could even be said that if it weren't for the living beings of the mountain and sea realm, it wouldn't have existed. Through the outer layer, one could faintly see a figure curled up inside, as if he was in deep sleep. Through his senses, the meteorite that had fallen into the western desolate domain was also displaying the same scene before his eyes. Speaking of the identities of these two, not only the natives of the 4 territories and 4 regions, but even the cultivators of the various sects had heard of them. There were many demons, devils, and outsiders in the mountain and sea realm, and all of them liked to link their clan's origins to the mountain and sea realm. They were the 2 brothers, Bo Xian and Bo Bai, who were rumored to be in charge of the sun and moon after Bo Yuan split the heavens. At first, Zhang Yan had speculated that it might have been a rumor from the ancestors, or perhaps it really was an image left behind by some almighty being. As for the specifics, he hadn't been able to come to a conclusion. After all, there were many bizarre things in the heavens that no one knew exactly what they were. However, after returning to the mountain and sea realm, he realized that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Most likely, it was the aura of a true young cultivator of the same generation. Furthermore, he was certain that it was a mortal cultivator. According to Fu Qingming, true young cultivators had always been rare, and all of them had a name or surname. If he could trace their past, he would be able to identify them. Just now, when he entered the mountain and sea realm, he couldn't sense any traces of their past. Even using the magic of the patriarch, he couldn't find the whereabouts of that senior. Without a doubt, this senior had long since passed away. Furthermore, because of how much time had passed, there was no way to know who this senior was. According to his speculations, it was highly likely that this senior had encountered some unknown tribulation, which had caused his aura to scatter and end up in this place. This aura wasn't just randomly drifting around. Perhaps it had been to the mountain and sea realm before, or perhaps it had sensed an opportunity to turn things around. However, this person wasn't like the one Fu Qingming had left behind. He couldn't enter the mountain and sea realm and could only linger outside. Over time, he had created a half-realm here. Most likely, after sensing that the living beings in the mountain and sea realm worshipped the sun and moon, he felt that it was beneficial to him. Thus, he began to evolve, and in turn, declare his existence to the mountain and sea realm. True yang cultivators could cause all living things to revolve in a direction that was beneficial to them. Although this strand of aura couldn't do that, it could still guide living beings. Therefore, the two of them could be considered to be mutually beneficial. Originally, it had been a long time before it was born. As for why it had fallen here, it wasn't without reason. Almighty cultivators could sense whether they were lucky or inauspicious, and this aura had been left behind by a true yang cultivator. Coincidentally, Zhang Yan had been about to close the true yang gate, and the aura had been left behind. Because of the entanglement of karma, it had a premonition that something was about to happen to it. Therefore, it had hurriedly fallen into the realm, hoping to be born as soon as possible. That was one of the reasons why life force had continued to rise up inside of it. The two largest pieces were in the western sky badlands and the frigid northern depths. As for the pieces that had fallen into the sea, they were just bits of impurities that had been thrown out during the fusion process. Zhang Yan was clearly aware that if this didn't happen, this thing would continue to sleep until Bo Bai and Bo Xian truly appeared in the world of mortals. Moreover, as soon as they appeared, they would possibly possess the might of the legends. However, ever since Taoist cultivators had arrived in the mountain and sea realm, they had been killing demons, devils, and outsiders. Most of the tribes who had worshipped Bo Bai and Bo Xian had been defeated and forced to submit. As for the remaining tribes, such as the 100 kingdoms of the eastern wastelands, they had begun to doubt whether or not almighty beings like them really existed in the realm. Even as he studied it, the meteor began to shake violently, and the eyes of the figure flickered, as if it might awaken at any moment. That was because it had sensed Zhang Yan's presence, and instinctively feared him. Therefore, it had hurriedly emerged to hide. However, it hadn't fully awakened, and its divine abilities weren't complete. Furthermore, it was now inextricably linked to the mountain and sea realm, making it impossible for it to leave. Zhang Yan watched on calmly. Ever since he had noticed these two, he had come to the conclusion that he might be able to use them to defend the mountain and sea realm. That was especially true considering that he needed to restrain his aura, which meant that he wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything outside of the realm for some time. The only problem was that these two brothers had succeeded because of the natives of the mountains and seas. Therefore, once they entered the world of mortals, it was likely that they would be inclined toward the mountain and sea realm. That was something that could be easily resolved. As a true yang cultivator, Meng Hao could turn any unfavorable situation into a favorable one. All he had to do was guide them. Since I caused your incarnations to be obstructed, then I'll repay you with karma. He floated up into the sky, stretched out his hand, and moved the meteorite in the western absolute domain to him out of thin air. Then he raised his hand again, and the meteorite on the ground also slowly flew up. Two huge objects floated in the sky at the same time. Because of the mist surrounding them, it was as if there were two white suns and moons on the ground out of thin air, which was magnificent. As he did all of this, not only did the Qinsong school disciples outside of the spell formation not react, but even the cultivators of the various sects and clans didn't react in any way. In order to prevent any unnecessary disturbances, Meng Hao had completely concealed their senses. He waved his finger, causing two beams of spiritual light to fly out and enter the two meteors. Instantly, the two meteors that had been rocking back and forth grew quiet. Their life force was completely restrained and no longer leaked out. Meng Hao watched calmly. With the help of the magical power and vital energy, the two brothers were able to transform much faster than before. Presumably, it wouldn't be long before their true bodies would be revealed. All he needed to do was wait. At the same time, he was thinking about something very interesting. In the past, when he had cultivated the Tao, He had never seen anything related to true yang. However, now that he had reached the true yang realm, it was as if he had become more involved with it. It wasn't hard to understand. True yang cultivators might avoid each other, but the prerequisite was that they had to be able to sense each other. If they sensed each other, then their auras would collide, and all sorts of inexplicable things could happen. Putting all of this aside, such a powerful being could create something out of nothing, and such things would probably happen more often in the future. For true yang cultivators, this was actually a small matter. However, if it happened to ordinary cultivators, it might cause a calamity. Fortunately, this process would take at least 10,000 years, and it was normal for it to take hundreds of thousands of years. Thus, ordinary living beings wouldn't be able to sense it at all. Only those great cultivators might be affected, but as long as they avoided danger in time, they would be fine in most cases. In addition, he had always had a guess. When the great underworld patriarch was in the Yuhuan heavens, he had set a period of 1,000,000 years for the Luo Mountain Monastery to be guarded. He had a feeling that this was not set randomly, but that something would happen at that time. It seemed that the time had not yet arrived, but there were already many signs. This did not only refer to the things that were happening now, but also the various things that had happened before. For example, he had achieved true yang. Fu Qingming had used the method of karma to reincarnate into Tao God, and the chaos caused by the demonic cultivator's doppelganger in the smoke world could also be considered major events. As he thought of this, his eyes flashed. If this was really the case, then 200 or 300 years later, when the time came, the results would be clear. While he was thinking, he saw the two meteorites in front of him shaking violently. At the same time, there was the rumbling sound of heartbeats coming from inside. The mountains, rivers, and continents were trembling slightly, as if the earth was beating drums and the glaciers were crashing into the mountains. He looked over and saw that the two huge figures inside had finally begun to stretch their arms and legs, trying to break the outer shell. Although their movements were very slow, they were extremely powerful and firm. As the two of them gradually stood up, numerous cracks appeared on the meteorite wall while the sound of mountains collapsing resounded out. Numerous fine rocks fell to the ground and smashed open numerous enormous holes. In next to no time, the thick wall outside was unable to hold them in place any longer. A loud bang resounded as their enormous figures that supported the heavens and the earth finally appeared. Chapter 1636. As soon as the two enormous figures appeared, they blocked out the light from the sky, causing the ground to darken. Both of them were strangely ancient, with tall ears, square faces, and wide mouths. Their noses were like pillars, and their muscles looked like they had been cast from iron. Their bodies were tall and sturdy, except that the one on the left had white eyes, and the one on the right had black eyes. If any of the natives of the mountain and sea realm were here, they would recognize that these two looked exactly like the two deities that their tribe worshipped, Bo Bai and Bo Xian. In their minds, the two brothers had existed together with the heaven and earth since time immemorial, and were born as deities of this world. However, above them, there was a prime minister. The two of them looked up and saw Zhang Yan standing in the sky. They immediately moved their huge bodies and approached him. They knelt down and kowtowed to him, saying, "Greetings, exalted one." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had sent a strand of his divine will and magical power into them, and the two of them were convinced that he was the one who had opened up the heaven and earth and created all living things. In other words, he had taken the place of the legendary Lord Yuan. Although this was somewhat different from the truth, if it weren't for his guidance, the two brothers wouldn't have been able to develop complete intelligence. At the very least, they wouldn't have looked like this. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had done it. Furthermore, even if he had opened up a world and created all living things with his current Whaley status, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to do so, so he could accept it calmly. He looked down and said, "Stand up." The two brothers bowed again, and just now stood up. Zhang Yan clasped his hands behind his back and said, "You were born with the knowledge that your duty is to protect all living things in this world. From now on, if any monsters, demons, devils, or enemies from beyond the heavens come here, and I'm not around, you will need to drive them away and kill them. Do you understand?" Bo Bai and Bo Xian both bowed and said, "We brothers will remember it." Strictly speaking, the cultivators of the 9 continents weren't natives of the mountain and sea realm, nor did they worship Bo Bai or Bo Xian. Therefore, they weren't under their protection. However, in their eyes, the cultivators were brought here by Zhang Yan from beyond the heavens, and were born from the same source as them. Zhang Yan said a few more words, and seeing that there was nothing else to say, he said, "You too go." The 2 of them responded and slowly rose from the ground. They arrived above the void and hugged each other as if they were sleeping in the meteorites. Their bodies shone with a bright light at the same time. One of them turned into the sun, while the other turned into the moon. In the mountain and sea realm, there had never been a sun or moon. Heaven and earth were dim, and in fact, everything that could be seen was merely a projection of the stars. But now they were truly visible. The mountain and the mountain were, and the mountain, and were all, and the sky and the heave. In the sky, the stars, the mountain were, they were, mountain, and they were, and were, and. The living beings of the mountain and sea realm sensed something and couldn't help but look up. Most people would only notice that the sun and moon in the sky were different than they had been in the past. However, they had seen many strange sights in recent days, so they didn't think much of it. However, there were some people with strong qi and blood and powerful cultivation bases who could clearly see that there were 2 people inside. Both of them appeared to be sleeping, and as they breathed, the entire mountain and sea realm trembled. Some of the outsider greater demons looked at the 2 blinding lights and cried out, "Bo Bai? Bo Xian?" Under the sun and the moon, they felt themselves to be incomparably small. Just now, they woke up and cried out in excitement. This scene played out in every corner of the mountain and sea realm. However, the large tribes weren't moved. They knew that even if the ancestor god did appear, he couldn't compare to the almighty cultivator who had just arrived. Therefore, they decided to play it safe. In the Dragon Abyss Sea Marsh, Qi Yuntian was talking with the Gong clan elder, who had come to deliver a congratulatory gift. However, the Gong clan elder would occasionally look up into the sky, and was clearly distracted. Qi Yuntian said, "Fellow Taoist Gong, what are you looking at?" The Gong clan elder thought for a moment, then said, "Looking at the sun and the moon in the sky, those 2 people seem to be the mountain and sea realm's ancient gods, Bo Bai and Bo Xian. Hall Master Qi, you should know that the Eastern Barren country's sacrificial moon and sacrificial sun are here to worship those 2. As they spoke, Zhu Yi hurried into the upper extreme hall, bowed and said, "Honored Master, disciple has something to report." Qi Yuntian looked down and said, "Is it about the 2 people in the sky?" Zhu Yi said, "That's right." He looked at the Gong clan elder and said, "Those 2 seem to be legendary figures of the mountain and sea realm." Qi Yuntian's expression was the same as ever as he said, "It's fine. Just now, Temple Lord Duzhen informed me that these 2 people were formed from the 2 meteors. However, they were caught in a dangerous situation. Fortunately, Temple Lord Duzhen reached out and rescued them. These 2 exist to protect the mountain and sea realm, and will not interfere with us." Hearing this, Zhu Yi was startled. Then he exclaimed, "Palace Master Zhang is indeed worthy of being called Exalted Jinyang. If that's the case, this disciple has nothing to do here." After saying this, he bowed and left the hall. After he left, the Gong clan elder asked, "Is what Hall Master Qi just now true yang is true?" Qi Yuntian smiled. "Hall Master Duzhen told me this. I remember that your country's imperial grandmaster has the ability to communicate with the sun and moon. Fellow Taoist, why don't you go back and ask him? I'm sure you will understand." The Gong clan elder shook his head. "Hall Master Qi, why are you making fun of me? Everyone, you should know that this is not true." Qi Yuntian's voice was calm. "I couldn't before, but that doesn't mean I can't now." The Gong clan elder was stunned for a moment. Then, his eyes moved as if he had been enlightened. He clasped his hands together, bowed and said seriously, "Thank you, Hall Master Qi, for your reminder." He stood up from his seat and said, "Such a big thing has happened. As the most important elder in the clan, I cannot stay here any longer. What Hall Master Qi said just now, I will tell the great palace master truthfully. Qi Yuntian said, then I will not keep fellow Taoist any longer. After sending the Gong clan elder away, he thought to himself, originally, it was difficult to convince this junior. Now that Hall Master Dujin has enlightened Bo Bai and Bo Xian, I can make use of them. He naturally knew the truth of the origin of those two gods, but he could not say it so clearly to the people of Eastern Wasteland. After all, the people of the country had believed in these two since ancient times. If they knew the truth, it would not be beneficial to the harmony between the two families, and his plan would be obstructed. The Eastern Wasteland was not the same as before. After sweeping away the internal and external troubles, there was no urgent desire to expand outwards. In his imagination, if he wanted to use the power of this generation, it would probably take a lot of effort. But with these two here, there was no need for them to say anything. As long as they expressed their approval, he would be able to smoothly achieve his goal. After Bo Bai and Bo Xian entered the world, Zhang Yan turned his thoughts and returned to the Azure Sky Hall. He glanced around. The scenery here was very different from the past. Rivers and mountains were scattered everywhere, vegetation was flourishing everywhere, and between the high mountains and valleys, he could faintly see towers and palaces. Beneath his feet, he passed through a towering green forest, and then a rainbow bridge that crossed over the cliff, arriving at the main hall. Jing Yu stood in front of the stairs, his face full of joy. He bowed and said, "This lowly one welcomes Master back to the residence." Zhang Yan excused himself and sat down in the hall. He said with a smile, "You have managed this place well." Jing Yu replied, "Since Master is not here, this lowly one will naturally take care of this place." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "After the matters here are settled, I want to open up another world beyond the sky. When the time comes, you can follow me there." Jing Yu raised his eyebrows and said, "Yes, Master." Zhang Yan said, "I already know about the matters in the sect, there is no need to say any more. I still have something to do here. If Yen Yi and the rest come out of seclusion, then come and report to me." Jing Yu respectfully said, "This lowly one obeys. If Master does not have any other instructions, then this lowly one will take his leave first." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go." After Jing Yu left, he sat down on the jade platform and focused his gaze. In an instant, many worlds flashed before his eyes like flickering lights and passing shadows. These were all worlds that he could sense with his aura. If he wanted to, he could see their past evolution and many changes in the future. When he had achieved true yang, he had taken a look at them, but at that time it was only a cursory glance. He did not look at them in depth. But now it was different. He was looking for worlds that were suitable for the cultivators of the 9 continents. Although Meng Hao's aura encompassed 10,000 realms, most of them were weak. Even Taoist cultivators would not be able to reach very high levels of cultivation if they didn't have access to the outside world. Only a few of them could be considered places of spiritual energy, but that was about it. None of them could compare to the mountain and sea realm. After looking around, he found a total of 6 suitable places. This was not as good as the Yuhuan heavens, but it did not mean that the worlds he ruled were inferior to the Yuluo tribe. It was just that the tribes were just now, unlike the worlds that Fu Qingming had managed for a long time. Moreover, under his aura, almost 90% of the realms were just beginning to flourish. Most things in the world operated according to the process of prosperity and decline. This meant that the realms were still in a process of growth. Just like the sects of the 9 continents, although things were not going their way at the moment, they would flourish in the future. But among the 6 realms, there was one place that caught his attention. Generally speaking, the more spiritual vigor flourished in a world, the more likely it was that cultivators existed, and the same was true for demons. But there were no great demons there. It must be known that if the natives had not grown up, the outworld mutants would have invaded the world and devoured all the spiritual vigor. But here, everything was safe and sound. No matter how you looked at it, it was strange. After a while, he unconsciously moved his eyes and muttered, "So that's how it is." He thought for a moment, then reached out and saw a flat monster covered in luxurious fur spread out in the middle of the hall. This was a severed demon. Back then, he had used the living refinement technique to create this demon purely to help him in battle. Now that so much time had passed, its vitality had already been exhausted. However, its body was still perfectly preserved, so it was the right time to use it today. He pointed a finger, and a stream of vital energy poured into it. After a moment, the demon's back trembled, and it slowly propped itself up. It had come to life again. He waved his sleeve, and a huge realm gate opened up in the hall. On the other side, it led to the strange realm sky. Under his command, the intercept demon let out a howl and entered. Chapter 1637. Once the intercept demon entered the heaven realm, its fur immediately stood up. Pairs of eyes opened on its body, as if it had encountered some great enemy. It circled a few rounds in the sky. After a while, seeing that it did not encounter any attacks, it descended. However, it still let out a long roar, appearing irritable and uneasy. Zhang Yan understood why it was like this. There was a strange aura lingering here. Ordinary living beings could not feel it, and it was only targeted at those foreign species, monsters, and demons with tyrannical strength. For example, the void mutants could judge threats based on their pure instinctive aura. Usually, when they encountered a heaven realm with a powerful native, they would not rashly enter it. However, this heaven realm would undoubtedly give them such a feeling. Because of this world could maintain its stability for a long time without any defensive power. This aura was not innate. At a glance, he could tell that it was added to it. However, looking at the shadow of the past, he could be sure that from the creation of this world until now, no cultivator or foreign species had visited. Then, the owner of the aura should have come here on his own. This was actually not a bad thing. As long as he dealt with this thing, there would be no threat here. When the time came, he could send his disciples over and easily occupy this world. Under his command, the intercept demon soared into the sky and swept over the land that crisscrossed rivers and rivers. It left the vast and distant rivers and mountains behind, and flew quickly towards the place where the aura was. Along the way, he could see that there were also people on the land that were multiplying. However, they were still in a barbaric and ignorant period. They plowed, burned, fished, and hunted for a living. They did not even have words. They only used knots to record things. However, as long as living beings revered the heaven and earth, there would be many people who worshiped the heaven and earth. With the prosperity of spiritual vigor here, it was reasonable to say that there would be some people like sacrificial offerings who could touch upon some superficial cultivation methods. However, there were none of these in this place. Not only that, the birds, beasts, plants, fish, and insects were also like those places without spiritual vigor. They looked very ordinary, as if all the heavenly Whaley were separated by a layer of barrier. A few days later, the demon interceptors arrived at an incomparably majestic plateau. The tallest mountain on this continent also stood there. Halfway up the mountain, there was a huge hole that seemed to have been dug out by something. The hole itself was big enough to fit a mountain. The pure white snow that spread over the mountains stopped at the edge of the hole. Even if the howling wind reached here, it would disappear mysteriously. It was as if there was an invisible force here that blocked all external forces. When the intercept demon arrived here, it felt more and more uneasy. However, it was between a living and a dead creature. Its sense of danger was only to avoid and guard against the enemy. It would not succumb to its instincts. It would not follow its instincts. It would only follow orders. It would only of the mountain. Hence, it would of its wings and flew in. After entering, the path was very wide at first. However, the deeper it went, the narrower it became. The path here was winding and spiraling. Fortunately, there were no forks. There was only one path that led to the end. Another day passed, and it finally arrived at a large cave. It was clearly deep within the belly of the mountain, but it was incomparably bright here. The terrain below was like a basin, and there was only a mound in the center. It was at least 3,000 feet in circumference, and at the highest point was a jade ball that emitted a gentle light. It was also the source of the light here. Zhang Yan glanced at it. It was this object that separated the spiritual vigor from the living beings in this world. Even the underground demonic creatures could not be born. This was not to prevent the living beings in this world from peeping into the great Tao. It was more like it wanted to preserve the spiritual vigor here so that it would not be damaged. It was also because of this that the spiritual vigor here was the clearest among the 6 worlds that he found. It had not been contaminated by any external forces. He looked at the jade ball for a while. He understood that once he touched it, he would be tainted with the karma of this object. However, if the cultivators of the 9 continents wanted to take this place into their hands and spread their teachings here, they would have to move this object. Otherwise, they would not be able to breathe in the spiritual vigor. Furthermore, he had also seen some things. He understood that as long as he continued to climb higher, this karma would be unavoidable. Therefore, he didn't need to care too much about it. With his current cultivation, he would be able to take on whatever came his way. Therefore, under the guidance of his consciousness, the demon swooped down and opened a big mouth under its abdomen. It swallowed the jade ball. Then, it flapped its wings and flew back the way it came. Although the object was taken away, there would not be any immediate changes in the world. Before the living beings could obtain the Weili, they needed to be nourished by the spiritual vigor. This would be a long process. The only thing that needed to be guarded against was the abnormal creatures in the void. As long as he paid close attention, such things would definitely not happen. Since this matter was settled, he did not look at the demon anymore. With a flick of his finger, a ray of spiritual light flew out from the green sky hall and landed on the Dragon Abyss Sea Marsh. There, the rainbow-colored clouds moved like a flying dragon coming out of the water. After one round, a door that was tens of thousands of feet tall was erected. Half of it was above the water, while the other half was under the water. All the cultivators in the sect were shocked when they saw it. After Qi Yuntian saw it in the upper extreme hall, he knew that this was the realm-crossing gate that Zhang Yan talked about. Hence, after making some arrangements, he brought his disciples to the front of the gate. Zhu Yi looked up and exclaimed, "Is this the realm-crossing gate? It's really magnificent." Everyone nodded in agreement. It was not because the object was huge, but after feeling the majestic Weili that lingered around the gate, they felt exceptionally small. Qi Yuntian was enlightened. After conversing with Zhang Yan for a while, he knew the background of the realm space behind this object. He thought for a while and called, "Yusong." Chao Yusong stood up and said, "Teacher, disciple is here." Qi Yuntian said, "From today onwards, you will build a forbidden formation around this place." Chao Yusong said, "What is the size of the formation?" Qi Yuntian said, "Build according to the formation of the mountain gate. You can stop when I tell you to. Remember, don't be stingy with your precious materials." Since there were many realm spaces behind it, then there were endless treasures. Now, the first step was to take down the opposite side, and the rest could be considered slowly in the future. After giving the instructions, he said, "The opposite side is where the other realm space is. There are no ferocious monsters or demons there, only some native living beings. Zhu Yi, make some preparations and bring a few disciples there to open the mountain gate." Zhu Yi immediately accepted the order. Zhang Yan did not erect all the gates in one go. Qinsong School did not have enough time to arrange it. Also, it would take a long time to transfer manpower, so there was no need to be too anxious. After a few days, Jie Yao returned to the hall. He opened a hole in his abdomen and let out the jade ball. He took a look and the object floated over and floated near him. There was nothing much to investigate about this object, but the implications behind it were worth paying attention to. After looking at it for a while, he shook his sleeves and kept it. Because there would not be anything happening here, he left his clone here. With a thought, he appeared in the Red Continent in the next moment. After achieving the true Yang realm, his physical body had stopped here. He sensed that because there was an indescribable substance pouring into his body at every moment, it had grown a bit stronger than before. However, even though it was no longer the same as before, he was still unable to see through this place. In fact, after arriving here, he seemed to be unable to observe the myriad worlds as he pleased. His chi path and magic power were incompatible with this world. Instead, he could gain more by observing with his strength path body. However, this was not a completely bad thing. Because he could not see the outside world, the people outside would not be able to look here as well, so he could still use this place as a path of retreat. He carefully sensed it once more, and he noticed that Qi Lu wasn't as calm as he'd imagined, and it was like a living being. This didn't mean that Qi Lu was a living being, and it was another indescribable thing. He had the feeling that if he was able to understand its profundities, then perhaps his cultivation in the strength Tao would be able to improve once more. However, when his thoughts spun up to here, he didn't continue. Currently, his chi path and magic power were his foundation, and he could not even control this as he pleased. There was no need for him to be distracted and care about other things. He could put it aside for a while. As his physical body grew stronger, he would be able to see more things. It would not be too late to pay attention to it when the time was right. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly sensed something. His gaze focused, and he looked towards the universal heavens. He saw that outside the heaven gate of the primordial Jueyuan heaven, there was an enormous void variant wandering around, and it seemed to want to charge through the gate. He narrowed his eyes, but he felt that something was amiss. Great heavens like the universal heavens were all guarded by powerful cultivators, and any demonic beasts that tried to charge through would not force their way through. The sudden appearance of this thing revealed a strange feeling. He immediately focused and chased after the shadow. He immediately saw that there was a white bull standing on the back of this variant. It seemed to have noticed that he was looking at it, and it raised its scarlet eyes to meet his gaze. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared again. Zhang Yan's gaze deepened. It was just a shadow, but it gave him a sense of familiarity. If he was not wrong, it should be the Lord of Evil, Fu Qingming's original enemy, and it was very likely that it was one of those innate demons. He thought about it. Previously, when the Lord of Evil was killed, he chose to retreat. It seemed that it was not because he did not want to move, but because he was hindered by something. But now he was here again, and this time he was easily discovered. It was clear that he was here to tell him that he had his eyes on Yu Huan. Yi Futian scoffed coldly. The other party did not attack him directly, which also meant that the other party did not have much confidence in winning. Just as Fu Qingming had said, the other party was also fearful of Yi Futian and was not willing to fight him easily. The other party had most likely returned to probe Yi Futian, wanting to see what kind of attitude Yi Futian had towards Yu Huan all heavens. His eyes flashed, but he was not afraid at all. When he promised Fu Qingming to protect Yu Huan, he was already prepared to clash with him. Moreover, even if true Yang cultivators sparred with each other, they could still learn a lot from it. If the Lord of Evil really dared to come, he could use this opportunity to see what kind of expert in this realm was like. Chapter 1638. Zhang Yan glanced at the void alien again. He had promised Fu Qingming to protect this world mainly to help it fend off cultivators of the same generation. If it didn't involve a battle of this level, it wouldn't be worth his help. The monster outside Jueyuan Heaven was just a pawn that could be dealt with by the Yuhuan All Heavens. What he needed to do now was to notify them so that they could be on guard. Thinking of this, his clone that was cultivating in a certain evil realm suddenly opened his eyes and woke up from his meditation. He stood up and bowed to where his real body was. Then, with a step, he was already standing outside the golden hall of the Qinghua Heaven Cloud continent. He raised his head and took a glance before walking in with large strides. As for the disciples on duty in front of the hall, they did not notice this at all. There were even a few patrolling disciples who had clearly come into contact with him. However, it was as if they had met an illusion. They passed through each other and did not have any contact with each other. Ever since Elder Peng had unlocked the Yin God Spirit Cave, he had been leading the cultivators of his sect to suppress the demonic creatures everywhere. Just as he had expected, although the cultivators of the All Heavens were somewhat overwhelmed in the initial period of time and had always been on the defensive side, the development of the situation had always been within control. As more and more demonic creatures were destroyed at the beginning, the tide had gradually calmed down. There were even some powerful heavenly realms that charged into the area where the corrupted spirits gathered. However, the qi was clear and turbid. As long as there was spirit opportunity in the world, the demonic creatures couldn't be completely wiped out. This time, he had indeed found a good opponent. As a result, the battles within the heavenly realms had decreased by a lot. However, the spirit cave had been sealed for a long time. There were bound to be some demonic creatures that weren't easy to deal with. This was a price that had to be paid. At this moment, he was having a discussion with a few elders in the sect, and it was to deal with one of the great demons. It had escaped several times in the previous encirclement, and this demon had become more and more cunning. Several sects had suffered heavy losses one after another, causing those cultivators to be rather dissatisfied. Fortunately, several heaven realms had received a letter informing them of the whereabouts of the demonic being. After investigation, it was confirmed that the letter was written by the person who had informed them of the spirit realm's warning. This source could be said to be extremely reliable. Only then did they gather everyone and prepare to completely exterminate it. Just as they were discussing how to set up the trap, Elder Pring suddenly felt something and turned his head to look outside. He saw a Taoist in white walking in with a calm expression. He wasn't the only one. All the elders in the hall looked over and couldn't help but reveal surprised expressions. Because no one present recognized this person, and no disciple had come to report to them. Realizing that something was wrong, Feng Lan stood up abruptly and asked sternly, "Who are you?" Although the other party's background was suspicious, he did not make a move immediately. This was because this was the Golden Hall, and under the restrictive array, he was not afraid that the other party would harm the people on his side. Elder Peng stretched out his hand to stop him, gesturing for him to step back. He glanced over and asked in a deep voice, "May I ask where this spiritual master is from?" He was shocked because he couldn't see through the other party's cultivation level. He also didn't remember that there was such an upper-level cultivator in the heavens. It was very likely that he wasn't one of Yu Huan's people. If that was the case, he had to be very careful. The Taoist in white said indifferently, "I'm here on Yuan Zun's order to inform you of something." Yuan Zun? Elder Peng was startled at first, then he seemed to have thought of something. His expression became extremely solemn. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "May I ask what is the matter?" The Taoist in white said, "The person behind the evil prince is making a move again. All of you must be careful. There is a void creature wandering in front of the gate outside Jueyuan heaven. It was sent by this person. If you don't want the heaven realm to be damaged, you must deal with it in time." Elder Peng was shocked. Before Dugu Hang reincarnated, he said a lot of things to him, so he knew some inside information. He immediately made a decision. "Elder Guan, Elder Feng, the two of you quickly go to Jueyuan heaven. You must defeat the void creature." The two of them quickly agreed. Feng Lan wanted to say something, but Elder Peng waved his hand and said, "I know what I'm doing. You two go quickly." Hearing this, the two of them didn't insist anymore. After bowing, they immediately left the hall and headed towards the Ring of Worlds. Elder Peng bowed and said sincerely, "Thank you for telling me." The Taoist in white said indifferently, "I will stay in Xianhong heaven. If there's anything, you can look for me." Then, he turned and walked away. As he walked, his figure gradually faded away. When he reached outside the hall, he completely disappeared. Elder Peng's gaze followed him all the way, but he still couldn't feel any change in his qi dynamic. He knew that this person's cultivation had probably reached an unfathomable level. Just now, the Taoist mentioned the three words, Xianhong heaven, which was equivalent to revealing his background. Elder Peng thought to himself, "It seems that this person is from Shang Zun Zhang's sect. I wonder what his identity is. His cultivation is actually so high." But then he frowned deeply. Just the evil prince alone was already very difficult to deal with, let alone the person behind him. He sighed and thought to himself, "We can't fight back against these mighty people. Now, I can only hope that this person can stop them." Seeing that Green Jade Palace had already sent out their people, Zhang Yan retracted his gaze. He pondered for a while. Since the other party came to him, he had to do something. He had to retaliate. Otherwise, even if the other party didn't intend to attack, they would definitely take advantage of him after seeing him retreat. If it was possible, he could also take this opportunity to shock the person opposite him and make him restrain himself. As for how to do it, he already had a plan. After the evil thought was killed, he caught its chi dynamic and came over. Now, with the method passed down by the founding master, he calculated and chased after it. Suddenly, different scenes appeared in front of him, and he didn't know which one was the real landing place. He raised his eyebrows. This peer of his was much more brilliant than the demonic cultivator he had met previously. His chi dynamic was constantly changing, which was why there were so many shadows of the future. The only way to find the root was to spend essence chi to calculate its true location. Only then would he be able to find the root. However, just as he thought about it, he squinted his eyes. The reason why the future was not yet in the future meant that it would, to a certain extent, actually happen. If one were to look at it simply, it was actually a transition between karma and non-karma. The existence of the present led to the existence of the past, and the karma of the present reflected the karma of the future. After passing through one path, the root would fall, and the rest would naturally turn into nothingness. However, what he saw now gave him a feeling of emptiness. There was no return. It was very likely that the other person was deliberately confusing the heavenly secrets and manipulating the changes in the future to hide that wisp of truth. But the other person didn't calculate it based on chi dynamic, so he made a bold guess. The other person probably didn't know the method of calculation and only knew the art of evasion. However, he didn't know whether the other person was relying on a divine ability or the ability of a treasure. If this continued, it would be nothing more than one person dodging and the other chasing. Both sides would display their abilities and see who was more capable. This was different from calculating the enemy's chi when he shed his mortal skin. Even if he really found where the enemy was, he wouldn't be able to kill him. Because the divine ability and magic power couldn't land on the enemy, he could only land on the enemy and use his chi to wear down the enemy. Just now was the right time. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any result. He thought for a while and stopped what he was doing. The other person was probably just testing him. First, it was to see his attitude towards Yu Huan. Second, it was to see how capable he was. Before he achieved his goal, he wouldn't stop so easily. Sure enough, as soon as he stopped, the other side knew that their trap had been seen through, so there was another change. A strand of essence appeared in the void, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a purple-robed demon with a single horn on his forehead. As soon as it appeared, it aggressively charged into the outer half of Jueyuan heaven. It wasn't difficult for Zhang Yan to see that this demon was the condensation of the other person's chi. It was similar to the incarnation of the other person's chi. The difference was that it was formed by the chi dynamic of the Almighty and the origin was the same. The difference was that the original person was the one who did it and could do it as he wished. However, if it wasn't handled properly, it could be a problem. This kind of incarnation was not something a cultivator below the true yang stage could deal with. If it entered Yu Huan's path, it would be a disaster. Thus, he looked around and instantly summoned a void spirit and attached a strand of Yuan Qi to it. With this nourishment, the void spirit completed its earth-shattering transformation in an instant and rushed towards the void spirit. Seeing this, the demon stopped and allowed the void creature to tear him into pieces. However, the next moment he gathered together again. His expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't care at all. He just bowed to the void. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He understood the other person's intention. He was inviting him to fight with his incarnation to measure each other's strength. He couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what he wanted. If it was someone of the same generation who had too many chi dynamic problems, they might not be willing to accept this because they would be worried that their chi dynamic incarnation would be used by the other person. If that happened, it would cause great trouble. However, Lu Ming didn't have such concerns. Immediately, the void creature that could crush all of Yu Huan's cultivators was destroyed and turned into nothingness. Almost at the same time, a chi dynamic incarnation was condensed in the void. It was a green-robed Taoist. His swift response was clearly out of the other party's expectations. It also seemed to make him a little surprised. Although the demon did not move at all, he clearly felt this in his heart. The two incarnations stood opposite each other. One was a human, The other was a monster. In fact, they had already unknowingly expressed each other's position and origin. Both sides didn't attack immediately. Instead, they bowed to each other. After the bow, the demon still didn't have any expression. He just stretched out his hand and made an inviting gesture, indicating that Zhang Yan could attack first. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Because this was not a direct battle, it was just a test of each other's abilities. It didn't matter who attacked first. The person who attacked first might not have the upper hand, and the person who defended might not be at a disadvantage. Therefore, he didn't hold back at all. With a thought, the incarnation pointed at the demon's neck and instantly condensed a sword. Then, the incarnation slashed down and a ray of clear light slashed towards the demon's neck. Chapter 1639. The demon saw the sword light falling down but did not move. With a burst of sword chi, he was torn into countless pieces. However, just like just now, he changed back. Zhang Yan saw everything. This sword was not easy to borrow. If it landed in the Yuhuan heavens, it would be enough to destroy a world. If that was the case, it would be fine. For some fierce demons and monsters, even if their bodies were damaged, they could still return. However, this did not mean that there was no loss. Just like the change of spiritual opportunity, the use of chi and blood would always be lost. This was the deficiency of a celestial being. If there was no deficiency, there would be no change, and if there was no change, there would be no change. However, when the demon recovered, there was no loss of chi, not a bit more, not a bit less. How it was before, it was still the same. It seemed to go against the logic of heaven and earth. After the demon was hit by the sword, he stood there and did not retaliate. He only bowed his head in greeting. Zhang Yan smiled. How could he not know that the other party deliberately gave him a test? Just now, he had a rough idea of what the other party was going to do. The reason why the demon was unharmed was because the original body believed that this incarnation had broken away from the cycle of life and death and had existed forever. That was why it was like this. This was because it was given by the will of a true young Almighty. As long as it thought it was real, it would definitely become reality. Before it met anyone of the same generation, no one could kill it. This was because the so-called death, or life, no longer existed in its body. It had long been removed. Therefore, no matter how many times it was destroyed, it was useless. This demon was just casually formed and did not have its own consciousness. If it was let go once it awakened, it would definitely bring great trouble to the original body. Of course, due to the fact that their levels didn't change, these ferocious creatures that could cause great terror to cultivators of the lower realms were nothing more than ants in Zhang Yan's eyes. He could destroy them with a flick of his finger. However, if he were to personally enter the fray, then he would lose this round. The more intense the avatar had, the harder it would be to destroy it. In order to achieve that, one would need to pour in more divine wills. At the same time, the opponent would also be able to support the avatar from behind. Therefore, in the end, it was still a competition of vitality. If one's vitality was strong enough, there was no problem that could not be solved. On the surface, one could still win beautifully. However, this was also the most clumsy method. At this moment, if one really solved it like this, one would undoubtedly be at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan could feel that there was a pair of eyes staring at him, waiting to see how he would act so that they could observe his strength. As soon as he thought about it, he immediately came up with a plan. With a thought, the avatar faced the sky and brandished its sword. With a flash of brilliance, as if it had cut something, the demon strangely disappeared. This was cutting the void and banishing the demon into the void realm. If one could not find the way back, then they could only wander in there forever. Even if they were neither alive nor dead, it would be useless. However, it looked like that person was already prepared for it. In the next moment, the clone flew back. Because these two movements were very short, the demon looked like it had only flashed for a moment. Fortunately, it did not move from its original position. However, the following change was unexpected. Just now, it returned as if it had suffered a heavy blow. In an instant, it collapsed with a loud bang and did not recover like just now. The opponent was silent for a while. It was obvious that he did not expect this. Zhang Yan looked at it calmly. Just now, he acutely sensed that because of the intention, the opponent used more vitality to maintain the demon than his own avatar. He used this to his advantage. Just now, he made a total of 2 actions. The first one was to banish the demon into the void realm as seen on the battlefield. The second action was to order the avatar to circulate its spiritual vigor. With the sword light, it cut the surrounding half of the sky in the void realm and instantly transported it to an unknown number of years later. Perhaps it was 1,000 years, or perhaps it was 10,000 years, or perhaps it was immeasurable. The changes in the void realm and the half realm were different. In the half realm, time flowed as usual, but in the void realm, it was a piece of chaos. The two were not compatible. Entering and exiting the void realm would reduce the spiritual vigor. Of course, because the demon was immortal, his chi activity would not be reduced. What would be reduced was the vitality of the person behind him. If tens of thousands of years passed in an instant, then it would consume tens of thousands of years of vitality. Zhang Yan's actions undoubtedly consumed his vital energy as well, but don't forget, at every moment, his opponent was always using a little more vital energy than him, and in addition to the fact that he was traveling between 2 realms, the consumption was even greater. 1 or 2 years was enough, but if it was thousands or tens of thousands of years, or even an endless amount of time, then it would not be a small amount. The longer he went, the more he would consume, and that was a fatal point. Of course, Zhang Yan was only visualizing the will of the god. He had not reflected it into the real world. He only threw a cause for the opponent to accept. If the opponent was willing to accept it and was even willing to consume vitality, then the cause and effect would be established. Everything would immediately become real. However, the problem was that the opponent did not know how many years Zhang Yan would spend, so he did not dare to take the risk. Therefore, he did not dare to move. In this way, the fate of the avatar was decided. In fact, even if a true young almighty was indestructible and immortal, they could still be killed by their peers. This was the change of the heavenly secrets. Since the avatar had transcended it and was not affected by the cycle of life and death, then it naturally could not exist in the world. This was not because the avatar was killed, but because all the changes in the future were blocked by himself. In short, even the heavens would change, so how could he not change? If he did not change, then the heavens would come and kill him. This move of Zhang Yan only needed to gently touch the heavenly secrets to cause the avatar to collapse. This was more skillful than driving the avatar to kill directly. However, one had to see that he was following the heavens, while the opponent was going against the heavens. Therefore, one could not judge the difference between the two based on this. After this exchange, the opponent did not move anymore. However, his aura did not retreat either. It was as if he was waiting quietly. Zhang Yan knew that it was time for him to come up with the question. The person who came up with the question would also reveal a part of his background. The more he did, the more it would show to others. This was a test of a cultivator's foundation. If the question he came up with was easily solved by his opponent, then it would be a draw at most. He pondered for a moment and immediately had an idea. With a thought, the avatar formed by his will turned and instantly escaped into the Qi Lu. He still remembered that in order to break through to true yang, he purposely hid here to avoid the evil aura. In the end, the evil aura was devoured and even chased back. Right now, if the opponent chased after him, then he could test how far the Qi Lu could go. That way, he would have an idea of what the Qi Lu could do in the future. Not only that, but he could also use his mind to sense the opponent's methods. It was not that he did not care about this escape route, but because he had used it before, there was no need to hide it. However, because of Fu Qingming's performance last time, he had another guess, but he was not completely sure. No matter what, if the opponent could solve it, then he could. If he could not solve it now, then he would not be able to solve it in the future. The person on the other side saw that the avatar had suddenly fled elsewhere and understood what he meant. If he couldn't find it, then he would still lose this round. That person did not enter the stage directly. Instead, he formed another avatar according to the tacit agreement and let the avatar calculate its whereabouts. But after half a day, the avatar was still standing there without moving. Clearly, he could not find any specific traces. Zhang Yan only waited there quietly. When he was outside the Qi Lu, he could not see what was going on inside. However, he was clear that the avatar would not be able to find that place. If the main body did not want to lose again, then it would definitely help. If that was the case, Zhang Yan would be happy to see that. After waiting for a long time, the avatar finally moved. But at that moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. He felt as if something in the Qi Lu had moved. At the same time, the aura that had been lingering on the other side suddenly retreated, as if it could not care about anything else. It disappeared without a trace in an instant. It seemed that it had suffered some loss. Zhang Yan's heart shook slightly. With a thought, he entered the Crimson Continent and immediately put away the incarnation. He instantly understood everything. When the person in front of him saw that the incarnation had no effect after a long time, he really did pour his origin chi into it to assist it. This time, he managed to chase after the incarnation, but he encountered the same result as last time. Not only was the origin chi devoured, it was also chased back, and in the end, it seemed to have spread to the original body. However, that person was indeed quite capable. When he discovered that something was wrong, he immediately restrained his mana and escaped in time, so he was not too deeply affected. Here, he also discovered that the spiritual opportunity he devoured this time was much more than before. After thinking about it, he thought that this might be due to the advancement of his physical body. He pondered for a long time. Just now, although it was only a short round of sparring, he saw many things from his opponent. He gained a lot, and it would be of great help to his future cultivation. First of all, as he thought, if he wanted to improve now, it was nothing more than the word subdue. Subdue his mana, subdue his chi, and even subdue his own body. That person had obviously achieved this, or else he would not have escaped so easily in the end. The other thing was that the person had gathered his thoughts and fought with the avatar. It looked very ordinary, but perhaps he was not afraid of the avatar rebelling, or perhaps he could use some method to suppress it. He could not see through the real reason here, but what he cared about was whether subduing the avatar was also a necessary step. If that was the case, then he had actually already skipped this step when he achieved success. Apart from these, there were still some things worth thinking about, but he needed to go back and slowly sort them out. However, he had already come to the realization that if he wanted to improve his knowledge, he really had to exchange pointers with people of the same generation. Working behind closed doors was not completely useless, but it was obviously going to be slow. As of this moment, he realized how amazing the secret magic passed down by the patriarch was. All he had to do was come into contact with the aura of someone of the same generation, and he would be able to find them. In other words, the initiative was on his side. After thinking about it for a moment, he decided on his next goal. However, now was not the time. After thinking about it for a moment, he withdrew his thoughts from the Qi Lu and returned to the mountain and sea realm. Chapter 1640. When Zhang Yan went to the various realms, that was only his will. His true body was still above the sea of vital energy, in the land of yang fire and light, practicing cultivation. He had benefited greatly from his battle with the demonic cultivator. If he didn't understand the principles, he wouldn't be able to proceed. But once he understood them, he would be able to proceed smoothly. It was just like when a normal person walked through thick and dense fog and didn't dare to take a single step forward. However, if the main road was right under his feet, he could simply swing his arms and stride forward. In the true yang realm, cultivators had countless thoughts. He could practice cultivation while looking around at the various realms, unlike before, when he was completely unaware of what was going on in the outside world. The mountain and sea realm had some hidden dangers, but because he wasn't strong enough, he had been forced to ignore them. But now, his cultivation was different from before, and he could try to deal with them. He stretched out his hand, causing a jade statue of a golden wand to fly toward him. He had obtained it from the fallen palace city, and it had been crafted from a demon bone. Years ago, Sect leader Qin had speculated that the demon bird's cultivation base was higher than theirs, but had never reached that level. Now, he could see that his speculations had been correct. It was most likely a demonic devil who had cultivated the Tao of Strength to the 6th stage, and thus posed no threat to the mountain and sea realm. Even if it came looking for it, it would just be throwing its life away. However, he now realized that he couldn't find the shadow of the demon's past. That was interesting. The demon alone didn't have the ability to do so. Most likely, it was under the protection of some almighty being, or perhaps it was hiding somewhere, making it impossible for Meng Hao to find the root of the matter. Regardless of which possibility it was worth paying attention to. Of course, if he tried to use the secret magic of the Patriarch, he would be able to find some clues. However, that would definitely alert the people or entities behind the scenes, and therefore he didn't need to do that right now. His thoughts racing, he descended into the western void, heading toward the location of the fallen palace city. Because they were afraid of causing unnecessary movements, the sects of the 9 continents did not make a move on this place. They only sent a lot of demon dragons to live here. On one hand, it was to kill the surrounding demons and devils, and on the other hand, it was to guard against foreign enemies. Zhang Yan's figure flashed, and he was already inside the palace. He went straight to the immortal Tao imparting diagram. On the diagram, the immortal was sending a jade disc forward. The boy below was kneeling to receive it, and the phoenix was looking at it from the clouds. When he came here all those years ago, he believed that this was to support and display the status of the phoenix bird, and that it was able to live high up in the clouds. But now that he looked at it again, he had a different feeling. The phoenix wasn't above the Taoist, but it was coveting something on the Taoist's body. Furthermore, there was a ring of golden light behind the Taoist's head. If this represented an ordinary divine ability, then it would be fine. However, if it meant something else, then it would have to be taken seriously. After looking for a while, he retracted his gaze. With a thought, he landed in the back hall and walked toward a door. Behind this place was a small world that was on the verge of collapse. Later, Qinsong School felt that there was still some karma involved in this place, so they sent spiritual opportunities to maintain it, but they could only barely keep it from collapsing. At this moment, as he walked over, the dilapidated appearance of the small world gradually disappeared, and all the damage seemed to be smoothed by an invisible hand. He came to a hill, and there sat a Taoist with long eyebrows that reached his temples. However, his eyes were closed, and his vitality had long been extinguished. This was Wahong, a cultivator from Mount Qingjue. He had once left a letter here, asking someone to send his body back to the sect. When Zhang Yan saw this, he was afraid that this matter would bring trouble to the sect behind him, so he did not agree to it. But now he could do it. Furthermore, he also wanted to see what kind of power this Mount Qingjue, which was suspected to be connected to Taishan sect, was, and where he would meet with people. Thus, just as he was about to make a move, an indescribable feeling appeared in his heart. He couldn't help but pay close attention to it. His eyes moved as if he had seen something. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Fine, since that's the case, I'll follow the will of the heavens." After saying this, he did not stay there. He turned around and disappeared. In the void primordial sea, in an unknown world, the stars in the sky trembled endlessly, sometimes dim, and sometimes bright, as if they were about to be extinguished. Meteors fell from the sky, accompanied by fireworks. The land was in a state of desolation, as if the world could collapse at any time. In the sky, there was a palace city that looked like a great mountain. In the highest hall, there were 5 Taoists sitting there, each of them exuding a powerful aura, but at this moment, all of them looked serious, and their brows were tightly furrowed. In the middle of the crowd, there was a huge crystal mirror, and one could vaguely see countless cultivators fighting with demons and monsters. From time to time, there was a mysterious hole in the void after a powerful person was defeated. It was obvious that the battle was fierce. One of them said in a heavy tone, "The invasion of the demons is very urgent. Now, there are already 5 Shangzhen who have been defeated. Deng Shangzhen has already brought people to support them." Another person said hatefully, "This time, the demons have come in large numbers. It is clear that they want to destroy Mount Qingjue. Among the 5 of them, there was a Taoist Daoren, whose hair was half white and half black, sitting in the main seat. He was dressed in a robe that covered the mountain. It was obvious that he was the person with the highest status here. Although he looked hale and hearty, deep in his eyes, there was a deep sense of fatigue. He said slowly, "Have the people who were sent to ask for help returned?" A valiant Taoist bowed slightly and said in a low voice, "Reporting to the Hill Master, there is no reply. It seems that, like before, there is no result." The Taoist Daoren sighed softly. He looked up at the top of the hall, and there was a jade crystal that was shining brightly, but it looked like it was only the size of a grain of rice. He said, "Back then, the patriarch set a time limit of 1,000,000 years. Now that I think about it, the time limit has come. It seems that this place cannot be defended for much longer." As if to coincide with what he said, at this moment, a falling star hit the top of the hall, and with a loud bang, the whole hall shook. Everyone in the hall looked up with him, and when they saw that item, their gazes were unusually complicated. Back then, when the patriarch of Mount Qingjue saw that Bushutian was occupied by the demons, he wanted to take it back. However, in the end, when he saw that the demons were too powerful, he knew that it was impossible. Hence, he sacrificed himself and created a prohibition, and passed down this piece of Xian crystal of enlightenment to eliminate the incarnation of this generation's qi and to protect the people of Mount Qingjue from being infected. For 1,000,000 years, the cultivators of Mount Qingjue had joined forces with some of their fellow Taoists to block the demons' way out of the realm. During this period, many disciples had been sacrificed. However, at this moment he could no longer continue. Someone in the hall said in a low voice, "Without the help of a true young mighty person, we can't do it with just us." A young Taoist wearing a golden crown said angrily, "Back then, the patriarch had visited a few of our fellow Taoists, but only a few responded. Now, the situation is different, and the collapse of the world is right in front of them, but they still ignore it. Do they really think that this fire will not burn them?" Daoren looked at him and said, "Zhenren Lu, be careful with your words. How can you comment on the Lord's matters? It is our own wish to guard this place. I don't care about the others." A middle-aged Taoist on his left said in a loud voice, "Hill Master is right. It is the responsibility of Mount Qingjue to cut off the demons' way out of the realm. In order to protect our humanity, what's the big deal if everyone dies here?" As they were talking, a disciple suddenly rushed into the hall. A black-robed Taoist turned around and said unhappily, "What's the hurry?" The disciple was agitated and said incoherently, "Hill Master, everyone, the Lord has lit up, the nightmare stone has lit up." What? The black-robed Daoren stood up subconsciously, his expression surprised and happy. He said, "It really is the nightmare stone. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" The disciple nodded and said, "I've checked it several times, I'm sure I'm not mistaken." The old Taoist was also surprised. He closed his eyes and nodded. "That's right, the nightmare stone has indeed lit up." The black-robed Taoist said with a trembling voice, "Doesn't this mean that there's another Yuan Zun in our humanity?" The few people present were also excited, but at the same time, they were in disbelief. Daoren thought for a while and said, "Ever since Bu Su Tian was invaded, Zhou Huanyuan Jade was long gone. Yet, this one was able to achieve it. It's possible that he was brought out by a certain Vedanta. No wonder the patriarch said that there might be a turning point after 1,000,000 years." At this moment, a gray-robed Taoist on the east side said coldly, "Everyone, don't be too happy. If this one knew about this, he might not be willing to help us." Everyone's heart sank when they heard this. However, there were people who were not convinced and retorted, "How would we know if we don't try?" Daoren thought for a while and finally raised his hand to press down, indicating that there was no need to continue. He looked at the crowd and said, "Dear Zenrens, Mount Qingjue and many other sects have worked together to resist for 1,000,000 years. Now, only my lineage is left. I thought that there was no hope, but the heavens have not given up on me. If we want to break out of this predicament, we might have to rely on this Yuan Zun." He said to one of his trusted disciples, "Go and bring me the treasure passed down by the patriarch." The disciple bowed and went down. Not long after, he came back with a jade box. Daoran looked at it, then turned to the crowd and said, "The mystical crystals are running out, and this place can't be defended anymore. As the hill master, I should stay here to guard. Everyone can bring this treasure to look for that Yuan Zun. The rise and fall of our humanity depends on all of you. I, Yuan Zheng, am counting on you." As he said this, he bowed deeply to the crowd. The crowd hurriedly avoided him and tried to persuade him. "Hill Master, you can't." However, Daoran raised his hand and stopped the crowd from speaking. He said seriously, "Let's go. While the mystical crystals can still protect you, leave quickly. If you delay, things might go wrong. This is my order, you don't have to say anything more." The crowd saw that his words were firm, and the order could not be disobeyed, so they had no choice but to obey. Because the lineage of Mount Qingjue had been fighting the demons for a long time, they moved quickly. Once the order was given, in less than half a day, the 4 Taoists brought all the junior disciples and retreated from this place. After a few days, the heaven and earth shook. Daoran was originally sitting cross-legged in the hall. At this moment, he opened his eyes and walked out calmly. Facing the howling wind, he stood alone in the empty space in front of the hall, his white beard fluttering in the wind. Not long after, the murky sky was suddenly torn open, and a handsome Taoist in a green robe with red lips walked out. He looked down and said with a smile, "Yuan Zheng, your Mount Qingjue has resisted the mandate of heaven for millions of years. Today, you are about to be destroyed. Why don't you surrender quickly?" Doran's eyes were like lightning, and he said in a serious tone, "How dare a mere demon talk nonsense about the mandate of heaven? For the survival of our humanity, so what if I die a horrible death?" As soon as he said this, he gathered all the power in his body, and a ball of light ignited around him. It was like a star in the dark night, pushing away the haze, and rose into the sky, resolutely rushing towards the murky darkness in the sky. Chapter 1641. In the primordial ocean of the void, a boat was moving forward. The 4 Taoists of Qingjue Mountain sat in a circle, but all of them were in low spirits. This time, the only ones who could escape were the 4 of them. The rest had all perished. The black-robed Taoist looked up at the sky. The mystic crystal was floating there, emitting a faint light that enveloped the boat. This item was brought along this time as well. It was used to block the true young Almighty Being's sight. Otherwise, they would not be able to escape. He asked in a low voice, "Are the arrangements for the disciples down there done?" One of the disciples on duty replied, reporting to Shang Zhen, "Everything has been settled." The gray-robed Taoist said, "Qingjue Mountain cannot go without a leader. Now that Mountain Master Yuan is dead, we should elect another one." No one spoke. The gray-robed Taoist ignored him and continued, "This matter cannot be delayed. Even when we speak to Yuan Zun in the future, we should have someone to talk to." A middle-aged Taoist with a determined expression said, "Well said." He turned to look at the black-robed Taoist and said seriously, "Yen Du, Elder Yen is of high status and has the highest achievement among the 4 of us. You are always in charge of the sect's affairs and have always been calm and steady. I, Qian He, am willing to elect Elder Yen as the Mountain Master." The young Taoist wearing a golden crown immediately said, "I, Lu Jianpain, am also willing to elect Elder Yen as the Mountain Master." The gray-robed Taoist nodded. He tidied his robe and stood up to bow to the black-robed Taoist. "Greetings, Mountain Master." Lu Jianpain and Qian He saw each other and stood up to bow as well. They said in unison, "Greetings, Mountain Master." The black-robed Taoist did not decline. He stood up slowly and accepted the bow, confirming his status. He then said, "Greetings, Mountain Master." When the 4 of them sat down again, there was a clear division between the leader and the follower. However, with the new Mountain Master taking over the position, the originally gloomy atmosphere was lifted. Yen Du saw that the 3 of them were looking at him. He pondered for a while and said, "After the demons have destroyed Qingjue Mountain, there will be no more obstacles in the way. They will definitely try their best to break through the barrier. Their next step will be to invade the void's primordial sea. If we do not stop them, then our Tao will be in danger. He paused for a moment and said, "Our top priority now is to find that Yuan Zun as soon as possible. However, the glazed crystal can only last for 1 to 200 years. If there are no results by then, it is very likely that those demons will discover our whereabouts. However, although the Quan's stone has light, it is difficult to find this person's whereabouts in a short period of time. I wonder if the elders have any suggestions?" Qian, he said, "I remember that when the ancestors scattered the nightmare stones back then, there was a star sundial left behind and it should still be in the treasury. Combining the two, we might be able to find that person's whereabouts faster." Lu Jianping, however, had a different opinion. He said, "Who knows how many nightmare stones were scattered in the past? In the boundless void primordial sea, if we don't take the correct path, we'll just be trying our luck." "I don't think so." Yen Du turned to look at the gray-robed cultivator and said, "Elder Yu, I wonder what your thoughts are?" Yu Fu said expressionlessly, "Only a true young almighty figure can find someone of the same generation. I think we should first look for the few Yuan Zun that the ancestor knows and ask them to help us deal with the demons and monsters. If they are unwilling, then we can ask them to help us find this person. That will be much easier." When Lu Jianping heard this, he vehemently objected, "That's not appropriate. This time, I came out with the sect's treasure. This was brought out by the ancestor from Bu Su Tian. Even those demons wanted to get their hands on it, but they didn't succeed. To put it bluntly, if those few Yuan Zun covet it and find an excuse to leave this item behind, what should we do?" Qian, he said, "Elder Lu's worries are not unreasonable. If a venerable one has this idea, then we are indeed powerless to deal with it." Actually, everyone present understood that if a certain Yuan Zun left this treasure behind and was also willing to accept this matter, then it would be fine. However, if he left the treasure behind and chased people away, then they would be powerless to resist. Yu Fu did not say anything. He was only suggesting a strategy. As for what to do and how to choose, it was ultimately up to the leader of the sect to decide. Yen Du thought about it and said, "It is indeed not easy to find that Yuan Zun with just us. However, the two elders are too concerned and have neglected one thing. The thoughts of the almighty figures of the upper realm are different from mine. In reality, there might not be a Yuan Zun who would be willing to take this treasure away. If he did, in my opinion, it would be a good thing." Lu Jianping and Qian, he were stunned. However, after thinking about it again, they somewhat understood what he meant. This treasure was coveted even by the demon. If anyone took it away, then they would undoubtedly be targeted by the demon. It was even possible to say that it would lead to a battle between the two sides. If they could think of this, the almighty figures of True Yang would naturally be able to think of it as well. They might even be able to foresee the outcome. Therefore, if there was an almighty figure who was willing to take this treasure away, then they would most likely be prepared to fight. It was no wonder that Yen Du said this was a good thing. Lu Jianping was still a little worried. He said, "But what if the treasure is taken away, and the demon doesn't move?" Yen Du said, "Even if the demon doesn't fight, the treasure will still fall into the hands of the cultivators of the human path. It's still better than the demon getting it." Qian, he said, "Mountain Chieftain's words make sense. Being afraid of the slightest thing is not the way of our generation. Who can say for sure what will happen in this world? There's no need to be too calculative. In the worst-case scenario, we will just have to fight with the demon. As long as we don't lose our conscience, we will have no regrets even if we have to go through 100 tribulations." Lu Jianping's emotions were stirred up by his words. He said, "Elder Qian is right." Yen Du said, "When the ancestral master was still alive, he had some friendship with Supreme Venerable Lin. Furthermore, he has the token. We can try to go there first. If we can't do it, then we'll go somewhere else." Seeing that he had made his decision, the three of them all stood up and bowed. They said, "We will obey Mountain Chieftain's order." With the help of the token, the spirit boat headed towards a world. The void's primordial sea didn't have any distance. The four of them only felt the flow of qi. After 3 years, The response from the token became more and more obvious. Then, the surroundings trembled slightly. They knew that they had arrived at the Earth boundary. Yendu focused his gaze and looked ahead. He felt a door to the world. However, he didn't dare to barge in without permission. He knew that the people of the Earth boundary must have noticed their whereabouts by now. Someone would come over in a while. Not long after, a tall and handsome cultivator walked out from the world ring and headed towards the spirit boat. Yendu took the initiative to greet him with the three elders. Seeing that the person was approaching them, he stepped forward and said, "Are you Yuan Zun's fellow Taoist? I am Yendu of Mount Qingjue. I'm here to ask for a favor from Yuan Zun." The cultivator returned the greeting and said faintly, "The Yuan Venerate is in seclusion, so it is inconvenient for him to receive guests." However, he knew that fellow Taoist from Mount Qingjue would be here, so he prepared some things. "Please keep them well." As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve, and a jade bottle flew out. Yendu sighed. He could see that although the other party was courteous, his attitude was rather cold. It was obvious that he didn't welcome them. He just wanted to send them away with some external objects. He thought about it and accepted the jade bottle. If he was still an elder, he would have rejected it. However, as the leader of a sect, he had to consider the whole of Mount Qingjue. He wouldn't do something so impulsive. Then, he bowed again and returned to the spirit boat with the three silent elders. However, once they returned, Lu Jianping couldn't help but say angrily, "What is the meaning of this? Doesn't he know how much trouble the demons will cause when they invade the primordial sea of void? By then, will the mighty ones really be able to sleep peacefully?" Yu Fu calmly said the truth. "I'm afraid that's not the reason. It's because we are too insignificant to speak to the mighty ones of the upper state." Everyone fell silent. The true young mighty ones had already reached a different level. They could see things that ordinary people couldn't. They had their own considerations, so why would they care about the words of a lowly cultivator? All in all, the status and cultivation of both parties were not equal. They couldn't even talk to each other. Qianhe said, "Hill Master, where should I go after this?" Yendu thought about it and said, "We can try to go to the Yaokong tribe again." Lu Jianping said, "I'm afraid we'll hit a wall again." Yendu's attitude was very firm. He said, "If we don't do it, how will we know the result?" At this moment, a voice rang out. "Fellow Taoists, there's no need to go there. They won't agree to wait for you." This sudden voice startled the four of them. They turned around and saw a 12 or 13-year-old youth standing there. He had red lips and white teeth. His eyes were like lacquer, and his skin was like a jade sculpture. He was only wearing clothes made of coarse cloth. This youth's appearance was very sudden. Yendu's heart skipped a beat. He should be the one who had stopped at the realm gate just now. He had come on the spirit boat just now. However, to be able to come here without making a sound, he was definitely not someone easy to deal with. He gestured for the three of them to keep quiet and went forward to bow. He said, "May I ask who you are? And why do you say so?" The youth said seriously, "I can't reveal my identity to you. I've tried to convince the few Yuan Zun to come with us to deal with the demons. However, just like what happened to the founding master of your sect 1,000,000 years ago, no one was willing to respond to me. I advise you not to waste your efforts." Yendu was surprised. To be able to talk to the mighty people, this was not simple. Could it be that this person was also a mighty person? However, this youth gave them the feeling that he did not have any mana. He did not look like a clone, which was a little strange. He thought again and bowed. "Since you know about us, I wonder if you could give us some pointers?" The youth nodded and said, "I'm here for this matter. Do you remember a sect called the Golden Phoenix Sect, fellow Taoist Yen?" Yendu recalled and said, "I remember. It was a sect supported by an innate demon. Later, it was destroyed by Qingjue Mountain." The youth said, "Fellow Taoist, you can look for opportunities from the things you seized back then." Yendu thought for a while and asked, "Can you tell me more about it?" The youth shook his head and said, "I can only sense that the opportunity is here. As for what it is and what will happen next, I don't know." Yendu wanted to say something, but just as he was about to speak, he realized that the youth was no longer in front of him. He pondered for a while. The Golden Phoenix sect? He turned around and said, Elder Yu, you're the oldest among the four of us. You were also in the battle with the Golden Phoenix sect. Can you guess what it is? Yu Fu thought for a while and said, Mountain Master, please wait for me. Not long after, he turned around again, this time holding a sky-reaching sundial in his hand, and said, After the destruction of the Golden Lawn sect, our sect obtained more than 10 sky-reaching sundial, each pointing to a different world. Among them, only this one is very strange. At that time, when the sect tested it, we felt that the aura on the other side was obscure and unclear, as if there was a supreme being guarding that place. We were afraid that it was a demon trap, so after occupying the main world of the Golden Lawn sect, we didn't pay any more attention to it and just sealed it. After thinking about it, I think that the opportunity that person mentioned just now might be here. Yen Du thought for a while and said, It might be this item. Chen He said, Then let's go there and see for ourselves. Lu Jianping said, This youth is mysterious and unpredictable. I wonder where he came from? Is Mountain Master really going to believe what he said? Yen Du said in a low voice, Since that youth could board my spirit boat, if he was a demon, he would have found my tracks long ago. He wouldn't have to do this. Chen He said in agreement, I think that we can try. Yu Fu said, Even if we can't get through, it won't be too late to follow the previous path. Yen Du nodded and said, All right, then let's go there. As he said that, he pressed his hand on the Tong Tiangu. In an instant he sensed a place with obscure qi dynamic. Chapter 1642. Beyond Heaven, Above the Sea of Vitality. Zhang Yan sat amidst the endless bright light of the Yang fire. Enveloped by the boundless qi activity, all the worlds in the void revolved around him. As he tried to rein in his qi dynamic, there was a change of movement and stillness, yin and yang. The mighty mana swept across the worlds like a tide. Among them, many worlds that originally had no spiritual vigor were sent to clear their spirits, but at the same time, many worlds had their spiritual vigor swept away. However, due to his conscious control, there might be some changes to the heavens and realms because of this, but without tens or even millions of years of time, the changes would not truly appear. He could have tried to do this in the broken jade, but there was a problem. The broken jade would not evolve into any living creatures. As a true yang cultivator could make all things beneficial to himself, then conversely, his actions were not beneficial to all things. If he only wanted to increase his cultivation and mana without caring about anything else, he would kill countless living creatures during this period. This would go against his original intention. It must be known that all living creatures were also part of the operation of heaven and earth. If he could not avoid this during the operation, then his cultivation would not be complete. Now, he had not decided on a name for his next abode. It was not that he did not want to take it, but he felt that his cultivation was not complete, the opportunity had not arrived, and the mysteries of heaven had not been revealed. When the time came, there would be a name on it, and he did not have to deliberately ask for it. Just as he was cultivating here, a strand of his consciousness was cast into the void sea where the Qinsong school was located. After this place was built, the ordinary people of the sect came to cultivate here one after another. This time, he did not come to look for them, but to return a promise from the past. He stood on the sea and looked over. He saw a big Kuan flipping the waves and swimming happily. He could not help but smile and said, Zhenrening, long time no see. Ingui sensed his qi dynamic and immediately came over. With a childlike voice, he said, What brings Hall Master Du Zhen here today? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Do you still remember, Seijing? Back then, in order to gather enough precious materials to refine a treasure, I borrowed some of your blood essence from you. You can say that I owe you a favor. Now, it's time for me to return the favor. He stretched out his hand and tapped lightly on Ingui's head. Ingui took a step back and shook her body. After a while, she said cheerfully, I found you, I found you. All the great Kuan species originated from the same ancestral Kuan. No matter where a new species was born, all the members of the same species would immediately know about it. Logically speaking, the members of the same species should be able to sense it. However, due to the lack of spiritual vigor in the 9 continents, Ingui had been hiding in the screen wall for tens of thousands of years and had lost the ability to find the members of the same species. The spirit of the void had lost a part of its memory. It instinctively wanted to find it, but it didn't know what it was. That was why it asked Zhang Yan for help. Today, it had picked up these things again. It could vaguely sense the existence of many of its kind, so it was naturally overjoyed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since Zhenren Ing has found the past, I believe you will be able to learn more from the members of the same species in the future. I won't say anything more." He looked around again and said, "This void sea is beneficial to mortal metamorphosis cultivators, but to Zhenren Ing, it's like a pond. You can't stretch your body. Since I'm here today, I'll change it for Zhenren Ing." With a wave of his sleeve, a stream of clear air descended and disappeared in an instant. On the surface, the sea did not seem to have changed at all, but in reality, it was instantly changed into a place like the sky. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was boundless, and it was enough for a large Kuan to live in. Seeing this, Ingui was even happier. He dove in and swam happily. Zhang Yan faintly smiled before he turned around and left. This time, he directly returned to the Xinyuan small world. As his cultivation improved greatly, this simple small world could no longer accommodate him. In the future, he would open up another big world. However, he came here today for a talisman that had yet to be refined. He looked up and saw a dragon's heart hanging in the air. Countless small things that looked like meridians and blood vessels spread in all directions. It was crystal clear, like the Milky Way. This thing wasn't static, but it was beating slowly. Because it was measured in years, it didn't seem to move in the eyes of ordinary people. Every time it stretched, most of the spiritual vigor in the small world would be slowly guided into it. After it shrank, it would be released again. Because of this, the spiritual vigor here had undergone some subtle changes. Even the essence of the spiritual vigor was unknowingly consumed. Fortunately, the border pass was connected to the mountain and sea, so there was still a continuous flow of spiritual vigor from the outside. At this moment, a spiritual light flashed and Mountain River Child appeared in front of him. He bowed and said, "Zhang Ju greets Master." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "You've taken good care of this talisman." Mountain River Child replied, "I dare not take credit for it. In the past, Taoist Master Lu would come here to refine it whenever he had time. However, in recent years, he has been in secluded meditation, which is why he has left it to me. However, it's just ordinary care, nothing difficult." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Years ago, he had obtained the eternal pure heart and gathered many other rare and precious materials to fuse with it. He had felt that there were too many unknown almighty beings in the outer world, and that the mountain and sea realm could face the threat of the greater demon from the smoke world at any time. Therefore, he had wanted to refine a cornerstone treasure for the Xinyuan division to protect them. However, he had never imagined that after leaving Yuhuan, he would become a great true yang cultivator. Now that the treasure had been refined, it wouldn't be of much use to him. However, even if he couldn't use it, that didn't mean his disciples couldn't. Therefore, he could continue with the matter. He could sense that the treasure had almost completely fused with the world. The most important step had been completed, and all that was left was to slowly refine it. In fact, the dragon heart still had a lot of potential to be unearthed. It was just that in the past, it had absorbed ordinary spiritual opportunity, so it hadn't been able to fully show its potential. The only way to do that was to serve a mortal and reach the true yang, and feed it with purple pure medicine. However, that was impossible, and it would have been impossible before. But now, it wasn't a difficult thing to do. With a thought, he flicked his finger, and a strand of vital energy poured into the dragon heart. All of a sudden, there seemed to be a bright light flashing in the depths of the dragon's heart. Then, it became brighter and brighter, and soon, it could no longer be stopped. It was as if it was overflowing with light. In an instant, the entire small world was brightly illuminated, and the spiritual vigor of the entire world was also lively and lively. At that moment, a whooshing sound could be heard, like the echoes of the tides in the distance. It was also the sound of a huge creature taking a deep breath. At that moment, the entire small world was absorbing spiritual opportunity, pushing out all the impurities in the past, so as to be reborn. Whether it was the dragon heart or the small world, in fact, they hadn't accumulated any spirituality. This action was spontaneous, and it was the most natural. When Zhang Yan saw this, a thought flashed through his mind. His own qi dynamic covered the various worlds, turning everything in the world, and making it beneficial to himself. However, if he wanted to advance, he had to find a way to subdue it, so that he could retract it freely. This was also beneficial to him, but why couldn't he do it? This was actually because there was some conflict between the two. Once the qi dynamic was retracted, the expansion of the tribe would slow down, and even stagnate. To a cultivator, not being able to advance meant going backwards, so this was disadvantageous to him. However, if he didn't do this, it seemed that there was no hope to advance, and no matter how he looked at it, it was a dilemma. What he needed to do here was to make a choice. Previously, he had been thinking about this matter. Looking at this scene, he had some ideas. As the saying goes, there can be no construction without destruction. Only with sacrifice can there be gain. Perhaps he needed to make a decision. However, such a big matter, he wouldn't act rashly, and it was impossible for him to do it immediately. He would first deduce it repeatedly, and then go to the same path for reference. After going through all kinds of verification, he would only do it when he had a clear idea. After some thought, he looked at the field again. After the initial throb, the movement caused by the dragon heart was slightly smaller than before, and the surrounding spiritual opportunity was also much more peaceful. This treasure was nourished by the qi of vitality, and if it was refined in the future, then its power would undoubtedly increase to another level. However, this also caused the birth of this treasure to be extended by a lot. A treasure that could be formed in a few thousand years might have to be counted in tens of thousands of years. Speaking of which, with the power of the true yang, an object could be illuminated for tens of thousands of years in an instant. However, doing so would cause this object to be incompatible with the present world. This was equivalent to going against the heaven and earth, and it needed to constantly send qi of vitality to maintain it until it became one with all things. Only then could it stop. If the method was withdrawn during this period, then it would instantly return to its original state. Of course, this also required that the object that was illuminated by the supernatural power could withstand it. For an ordinary living creature, after experiencing tens of thousands of years in an instant, it would die in the blink of an eye, and naturally, it would not return. However, it had to be mentioned that even if it was an ordinary person, because of the existence of the opportunity, logically speaking, he could also become a mighty person in the future. If the mighty person used this method to eliminate him, it would mean that he had rejected all the opportunities in the future, and the future that he had lost would need to be filled by the person who performed the supernatural power. This was different from simply killing a person, or cutting off the shadow of the person's future. One was to kill off the future and cut off all karma, while the other was to take the initiative to bear the karma, and cause the person to self-destruct. The price of the latter was great, but the return was little, and the loss outweighed the gain. This was even more so when it involved such a treasure, so Zhang Yan would definitely not do such a thing. He looked for a while longer, then retracted his gaze and said to Mountain River Child, "Zhang Ju, you don't need to look after this place anymore. This world and the dragon's heart are one, so it is no longer suitable for you to stay here. I have other arrangements for you later, so come down and follow me." He intended to refine the mountain river painting again. Originally, the mountains and rivers in the painting were just illusions, but if he used his true yang energy to observe it, everything would become reality, and that would be the real mountains and rivers in the painting. The mountain river painting could even contain an entire world. This treasure was useless to him, but he could also give it to his sect. In the future, the two treasures could complement each other, and they could play a great role. When Mountain River Child heard this, he was overjoyed. He bowed and said, "This lowly one understands." After that, he turned into a spiritual light and flew up. Zhang Yan nodded, waved his sleeve, and kept him in, then took a step out of the Xinyuan small world. Chapter 1643. Zhang Yan went outside and stood in the air with his sleeves behind his back. He looked at the mountain sea world. After his consciousness returned to the mountain sea world, he had one more thing to do. True yang cultivators could already awaken the memories of their disciples and others, allowing them to understand the original. Of course, the original here was not the true me, but the me that he knew. All living beings reincarnate for thousands of lifetimes, and every lifetime's experience and birth were different. Only that bit of true spirit was the true original. It could be said to be the purest, the essence of nature, untainted by the impurities of the world. Born as a human, it was impossible to bear everything, and one could only choose one to live on. If he opened up his past consciousness, it would be the karma that was formed between them, or the master and disciple. However, reincarnated people had different opportunities in every lifetime. If one was a powerful cultivator in the previous lifetime, they might not have the qualifications to enter the Tao in the next lifetime. In such a situation, one had to wait patiently. As long as the mountain gate was still there, and there was someone to guide them, then after thousands of years, they would be able to wait for the right opportunity. However, Zhang Yan looked around, and among the people he wanted to awaken, there was no one who had the right opportunity to enter the Tao. Of course, this was from his perspective as a true yang cultivator. If ordinary cultivators reincarnated, due to their strong original spirits, most of them were born extraordinary. If they were placed in an ordinary sect, they might be able to be recruited. However, in his eyes, if they entered the Tao in such a hurry, their future would be extremely limited. They might even have to reincarnate again before they could achieve immortality, so it was better to wait for a more suitable opportunity. Although he could change the qualifications of his disciples, and had done so before, he now realized that there might be repercussions in the future. On this point, it was better to follow the natural law. With his aura in this world, as long as the laws of fate appeared, he would be able to sense it. At that time, he would be able to awaken his previous life and guide them into the Tao. He glanced around again and was about to head back to the Green Sky Hall, but at this moment he raised his eyebrows and looked towards the Dragon Abyss Sea Marsh. He saw a group of cultivators walking towards the realm gate that he opened up. However, there were several impure chi dynamics mixed in, but no one noticed it. Even the restrictive formation did not alert them. He took a look at their past and immediately knew their background. Just as he was about to clean them up, he smiled and said, "Never mind, there are no demons or monsters there." If a cultivator stays there for a long time, he will definitely lose the desire to advance. With this group of people there, they can be used as a whetstone. This may not be a bad thing, let them be. Ling Kong Tion. This was the realm space where Zhang Yan found the jade ball that day. On one of the plains, a realm gate that was tens of thousands of feet tall stood there. This place was rarely visited by people, and it was located at the peak of the plateau. Therefore, other than the occasional large birds that flew across the sky, there were no signs of living beings in the surroundings. At this moment, rays of light flashed within the realm gate, and then people shrouded in the light of treasures came out. There were about 1,000 people in this group, and among them, only a tenth were cultivators. However, the people in the lead were 3 Yuanine cultivators, and behind them, there were more than 10 Shenying cultivators who looked surprised. A female cultivator with a fallen horse bun breathed in and out, and exclaimed, "What a rich spiritual opportunity! There are no cultivators or demons or monsters in this world. This is really strange." Beside her stood a boorish-looking Taoist, who laughed and said, "If not, how would it be our turn to come here?" Junior apprentice Sister Yen, "Speaking of which, this is a good job. We don't have to fight to the death, we just have to walk around and we can get some merit." Junior apprentice Sister Yan's eyes wandered, and she gently stroked a little demon dragon in her arms. She smiled and said, "Senior apprentice Brother Gao is right. If we were in the sect, we would either be killing demons or exterminating different species. It would be really boring. Coming here, we can also relax for a few days." While they were talking, a handsome Taoist who stood at the front turned around and said in a warning tone, "Junior apprentice Sister Yen, junior apprentice Brother Gao, we have just arrived here, and the situation is still unclear. Don't be careless." Junior apprentice Sister Yen said, "Senior apprentice Brother Tang, the sect has already said that there are no demons here, and that is definitely not wrong. Why are you so careful?" Taoist Tang said in a low voice, "But the masters have also said that it is better for us to be careful. This means that we cannot be completely unguarded. Since I am the leader of this trip, I should think of the safety of all the disciples. Even if there is a slight possibility, we cannot let our guard down. Do you understand?" Senior apprentice Brother Gao saw that he was speaking seriously and quickly stopped smiling. He said seriously, "Senior apprentice Brother Tang is right." Junior apprentice Sister Yen had no choice but to say, "Yes, senior apprentice brother." Taoist Tang made a sound of acknowledgement, and his expression became a little more relaxed. He said, "Then all of you should act according to the previous instructions. Don't delay." With that, he did not say anything more. He turned around and called the junior disciples of the sect over to arrange the specific matters. Junior apprentice Sister Yen pouted and complained telepathically, "Senior apprentice Brother Tang is too serious, not interesting at all." Senior apprentice Brother Gao laughed and said, "If not, why would the sect let him be the person in charge?" Junior apprentice Sister Yen, "It is better to act according to senior apprentice Brother Tang's instructions. Otherwise, he will remember me when he goes back. It is fine to lose some external items, but I am afraid that I will be laughed at by our fellow disciples." Junior apprentice Sister Yen sighed and turned to walk towards the mystic cultivators of the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland. She came to the front of the mystic cultivators of the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland, bowed and said, "Fellow Taoists, please." The leader of this group was also a disciple of the Gong family of the eastern wasteland, and his name was Gong Shan. His cultivation was not high, and it was only because he was a member of the Gong family that he was sent here. Facing a Yuaning Jinren, he did not dare to be careless, and hurriedly led everyone to return the bow. He said, "I dare not. Jinren Yen, do you have any instructions?" Junior apprentice Sister Yen smiled and said, "The land here is vast. Although there are living beings like me, they are still in ignorance, and are not suitable to be accepted as disciples. They need to be enlightened, taught, and built temples and countries. I will have to trouble all of you to do these." Gong Shan immediately said, "Not at all, not at all. This is what we should do." On the surface, these mystic cultivators from the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland were in an alliance with the Qinsong school, but everyone knew that these Taoists were in charge of this trip. Moreover, many of these Taoist disciples were descendants of the nobles of the 100 nations, so he was very humble. Junior apprentice Sister Yen bowed again and said, "Then I will have to trouble you. If there is anything wrong, you can come and find me." After she left, Gong Shan called everyone he brought here together. Because there was already an arrangement before they came, they only needed to give some instructions, and they released their flying boats one by one and flew in all directions. However, no one noticed that at this moment, there were several obscure chi dynamics scuttling into the distance, and they were not hiding in a valley. Gong Shan himself also boarded a spiritual boat and chose a direction to fly in. Looking at the majestic mountains and rivers, he said excitedly, "Such a good realm with such flourishing spiritual vigor. I wonder how many treasures can be nurtured, and there are no demons or monsters. This trip was really the right choice." An attendant beside him said in confusion, "Young master, does the Qinsong school really forbid us from passing down the cultivation method of qi and blood here? Are they not afraid that we will turn this place into another eastern wasteland? Wouldn't they have worked for nothing then?" Gong Shan waved his hand and said disapprovingly, "These matters will be decided by the grand palace masters of each nation. We should just focus on what is in front of us. Why are we thinking about this?" The attendant quickly said, "Yes, I have said too much." After Taoist Tang arranged everything, he took the trouble to check one by one, and his work could be said to be meticulous. He was a strict person, and under his supervision, none of the disciples dared to slack off. In less than half a day, a formation altar was built around the realm gate, and a circle of prohibition was laid around the big realm ring. In the hills far away, several chi dynamics floated up, and each of them had the same appearance, except that most of them looked strange, half human and half demon, but there was not a trace of evil chi on them. One of the women, who had an eagle beak and a human face, said, "This Tang Dunchun does not show any flaws. Lord Eong, it seems that your idea is not going to work. At this moment, if we get close to the prohibition, he will definitely find out." The man called Lord Eong was 30 meters tall, with the legs of a rhinoceros, the arms of a python, and a majestic body. He thought for a long time and then said, "No matter what, we have finally escaped. The living beings here are weak, and there are no Taoist cultivators, nor are there any demons or devils. Isn't this a good place for us to work? Considering how big this place is, all we have to do is get as far away as possible. That way, they won't be able to detect us. As long as we move fast enough, we can convert all of the living beings here into our followers. Then we can truly become gods of this world. Who would even know that we're from the mountain and sea realm? If there were any mountain and sea realm natives here, they would be able to tell that these people looked very similar to the legendary gods. In fact, this generation really did have a deep connection with them. Because of the appearance of the two brothers, Bo Bai and Bo Xian, the legendary gods who controlled the sun and the moon had appeared in the world. Many of the outsider tribes in the wildlands worshipped them, but no matter how much they called out to them, they never got a response. However, throughout the history of the mountain and sea realm, there had been more than just these two gods. The Bo brothers were the highest of them all, and therefore, some of the tribes believed that there were other gods. Years ago, when meteor fell from heaven into the mountain and sea realm, it had cast off a great deal of the impure energy. Now, thanks to the worship of the various living beings, it had been reborn, and in the blink of an eye, there were over 100 of them. However, compared to the Bo brothers, they were like the heavens and the earth. Although they had some miraculous abilities, the most powerful among them could only stand shoulder to shoulder with the Yuanian cultivators. It was important to note that the mountain and sea realm was flourishing with spiritual energy. Not to mention the cultivators of the 9 continents and the mystic cultivators of the eastern wastelands. Even in the wildlands, there were many outsider tribes with divine abilities and magical power. Originally, they had wanted to use their status to act like tyrants. However, they had never imagined that as soon as they left the mountain and sea realm, more than half of them would be slaughtered by the natives who assumed they were imposters. The rest of them didn't dare to act presumptuously, and instead hid deep in the mountains, never daring to come out again. According to the legends of the mountain and sea realm, Lord Yang was the person who controlled the daily arrangement of the stars. He was one of the wisest of his generation, and it just so happened that there were a few members of the nobility in the eastern wastelands who worshipped him. Inadvertently, he learned that some of the mystic cultivators were heading toward a relatively safe place, and he immediately took it as an opportunity. The Bo brothers didn't seem to care about them at all, and had been abandoned long ago. There were simply too many almighty beings in the mountain and sea realm, and they had no hope of surviving. Therefore, he had convinced a few of them to use their innate divine abilities to slip into the mountain and sea realm. Unfortunately, they were too weak. Originally, they had planned to go back and bring more gods to the mountain and sea realm, but now that they found out that the cultivators were on high alert, they couldn't do that. After a bit of discussion, they gave up on the idea and headed deeper into the landmass. Chapter 1644. In the void primordial sea, Yen Du and the others were traveling on a spiritual boat. After getting the guidance from the Tong Tiange, they finally had a clear goal. However, they were still worried. They didn't know if this Yuan Zun would be like the other Yuan Zun and not interfere in this matter. However, if they wanted to fight against the innate demons, this one was their only hope, since the other Yuan Zun did not want to interfere in this matter. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. The 4 of them were sitting in meditation. Suddenly, they felt something and woke up. Lu Jianping stood up and looked outside. He saw a colorful mist floating in front of him. His expression turned serious and he said, "Leader, there seems to be a void spirit." Yendu did not dare to be careless. At this moment, he had to be careful of the relationship between these abnormal creatures and the innate demons. Although the possibility was small, he still had to be careful. He stood up and looked outside. The alien's body was so huge that it seemed to fill up their entire field of vision. Although it seemed to be right in front of them, there was no such thing as distance in the void primordial sea. Therefore, they would never be able to get close to it. However, it was different for the void creatures. They could find a way to get close to it. He thought for a while and said, "Don't worry about it. If it provokes us, we can deal with it later." The three of them nodded. The void creatures had many strange skills and there were many kinds of them. Some were easy to deal with, but some were strong enough to threaten them. Although there were some recorded in the ancient books of the faction, there were only a few of them. For example, the one in front of them was one that they had never seen before. They had to be extra careful. After a while, the abnormal creatures suddenly disappeared. However, the four of them could feel a sense of malice lingering outside. This meant that they were being targeted. Therefore, they did not let their guard down. After a long time, the spiritual boat suddenly shook. At the same time, the four of them felt that their spiritual vigor was draining rapidly. It was as if something was swallowing them. Yendu and the others had abundant experience, so they immediately determined that they'd already entered the stomach of the void variant, and if they didn't think of a way to leave, then it was very likely that their vital energy would be completely seized and they'd perish. However, they appeared to be very calm at this moment. If they had not come into contact with this creature, then no divine abilities or techniques would be effective against it. But now that they had been swallowed by it, their auras were in harmony, and they could make countermeasures. The four of them had a brief discussion in the divine wills, then they sat on the four corners and pointed their fingers outwards at the same time. With a surge of spiritual vigor, light flashed continuously and the body of the void alien collapsed silently in an instant. Yu Fu stretched out his hand and caught a gust of qi. Then he took out a long stick of incense. With a pinch of 2 fingers, he lit it up and stuck it into an incense burner on the table. Yendu asked, "Elders, is there anything wrong?" Lu Jianpain sensed the flowing qi in his body and realized that more than half of it had disappeared. He couldn't help but exclaim, "This void creature is not simple. If we were a little slower, we would have died here." Qian He checked and replied, "Mountain Chieftain, what it absorbed was only the qi of my generation. No disciples of the sect were implicated." Yendu nodded and pressed his hand on the Tong Tiange. He was relieved to see that the connection on the other side was not broken. Yu Fu said, "This may not be a bad thing. The void is endless, and we don't know where we can't deal with the void creature. Now that the heart-healing incense has been lit, it'll be more stable once it's formed." This incense was also made by the people in front of Qingjue Mountain. As long as they killed a void creature and mixed its qi with this incense, they would be able to avoid the other void creatures before it completely dissipated. Yendu said with a serious expression, "There's no way to retreat in the void. It's inevitable that something will happen. Everyone, please recover your spiritual energy as soon as possible." The three of them agreed and sat down again to adjust their breathing. However, after this incident, they were all on high alert. Fortunately, no more accidents happened. After half a year of dissipating qi, the Tong Tiangue in front of them began to tremble slightly. Yendu couldn't help but open his eyes. He looked over and saw that the three of them were looking at him. He paused for a moment, then slowly reached out his hand and pressed on the Tong Tiangue. After a while, he said in a low voice, "If there's nothing we can do, we should have already arrived at the boundary." The expressions of the three of them brightened. Although they had come under the guidance of the young man, they would soon be able to find out whether the supreme expert they were looking for was here or not. Yendu stood up and tried to sense it. At first, he frowned, but then his brows relaxed. There was indeed a heaven and earth door in the outer world, but it was unimaginably sturdy. They didn't know if it was natural or man-made. If it was the latter, then the people in this world might really be related to that supreme being. Yu Fu came up and said, "Mountain Master, if this world is under the rule of that Yuan Zun, then we must have sensed it when we came here. We can't barge in recklessly." Yen Du nodded. He thought for a moment, then bowed to the sky and said, "I'm a cultivator of Bu Su Tian's Qingjue Mountain. This time, I was instructed to come here to pay my respects to the Supreme Venerable One. I wonder if the Supreme Venerable One will allow me to enter the boundary?" He didn't directly state the purpose of his visit because he was afraid that the other party would reject him directly. Then, there wouldn't be any room for negotiation. Normally, a true Yang Supreme being only needed to check a little to see their past. Nothing could be hidden. Fortunately, they had the mystical crystals left behind by the mountain gate as proof, so they could hide it. After he finished speaking, he maintained his bow. However, he didn't get a response for a long time. His heart couldn't help but sink. If they found the wrong boundary this time, then so be it. They would just continue to search. However, if the other party refused to accept them, then it would be completely hopeless. Just as he was thinking about whether he should state his purpose of coming, he felt a wave of dizziness. When he regained his clarity, he realized that he had actually landed in another world. The four of them were stunned. Only then did they come back to their senses. Lu Jianping said in a trembling voice, "Mountain Master, this method, Yen Du took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and said, "We've found the right boundary." At this moment, waves were rolling in his chest. He was definitely not as calm as he looked on the surface. It wasn't just because he had found the right boundary, but because he could finally confirm that there really was a Yuan Zun among the people of humanity. After a long time, he finally calmed his mind and looked outside. He realized that the spiritual boat was floating in the void sky. Not only could he see the stars in the sky, but there were also streaks of starry ribbons and rainbow lights intertwined, forming a formation. He stared at it for a while and said, "Elder Yu, have you seen such a formation before?" Yu Fu thought for a while and said, "This seems to be." Then, he shook his head and didn't continue speaking. Yen Du thought that he had some concerns, so he didn't ask further. He thought for a while and said in a deep voice, "No matter what, we can already confirm that the High Holiness is here. There's an Earth star not far away. Let's go there and take a look." After a few days, the spiritual boat broke through the atmosphere and slowly landed on the surface of the star. Yen Du looked up and realized that although this place was desolate, there was still spiritual vigor. Although it wasn't very prosperous, if one were to sense it deeply, there was a clear trend of rising. It seemed that everything was full of vitality. Yu Fu sensed for a while and said, "Mountain Master, the living beings here have just formed and all living things are born. However, there's no trace of people here. It seems that this place has been irrigated by external spiritual vigor." Yen Du nodded and said, "That Yuan Zun probably didn't lead me here casually. If that's the case, let's wait here." Yu Fu expressed his agreement. An ordinary cultivator wouldn't be able to guess the thoughts of a true Yang Almighty cultivator. They might have broken a taboo somewhere, so the best thing to do now was to do nothing. Lu Jianping transmitted a message through the divine will. "Mountain Master, we don't know how long this High Holiness has achieved Tao. Can he fight with those innate demons?" Yen Du shook his head and replied, "There's no need to think too much about this. Now, it's still unknown whether this Yuan Zun will agree to it or not. We just need to wait for the opportunity to inform him of our arrival. As for how he will do it, it's not something that we can control." Although he said so, he sighed in his heart, "I only hope that I won't let Mountain Master Yuan down this time." The four of them waited here for 100 days. On this day, Yen Du suddenly sensed something and looked up into the sky. The other three also sensed something and looked towards the sky. However, their expressions turned solemn. Two giants that supported the sky and the earth had appeared out of nowhere. In front of them, the planet that they were currently standing on was like a pellet. Behind them, there was boundless light as if a sun and a moon had suddenly appeared in the sky. Their chi dynamic was grand and majestic, as if it was about to fill up the heaven and earth. Yen Du was also knowledgeable. He could tell that the two of them were probably the manifestation of the true Yang Almighty cultivator's chi dynamic. However, it would be easy for such figures to kill them. He quickly stood up and bowed. He said, "May I know how to address the two High Holiness?" The one on the left said, "My name is Bo Bai." The one on the right said, "My name is Bo Xian." Yen Du bowed again and said, "Since the two of you are here, do you have any instructions?" Bo Bai said, "You are the cultivators of Mount Qingjue?" Yen Du said, "Yes." A light flashed in Bo Bai's eyes. Then, a long shuttle-shaped spiritual boat slowly floated down and landed in front of everyone. He said, "Then take a good look at this item." Qian He was stunned. He said, "Mountain Master, does this look like something from Mount Qingjue?" Yen Du looked at the two giant figures in the sky. Seeing that they did not speak anymore, he pondered for a while and walked forward. The three of them looked at each other and followed him. When they reached the inner room, they saw the body of a cultivator. There was a stone tablet beside it. The four of them looked at it and knew what it was. Qian He sighed. So it's perfected Zhua. He should be Elder Ma's disciple. After the battle with the Golden Luan sect, he disappeared without a trace. In that case, he was here back then. Yen Du said emotionally, "The world is unpredictable. I didn't expect Mount Qingjue to be involved with this place." He turned and bowed. "Thank you, High Holiness, for protecting the body of our fellow disciple." Bo Bai's voice rumbled again. He said, "Since you have seen it, then follow my brother." As soon as he finished speaking, the four of them were lifted up by a beam of light. Then, heaven and earth shook, and everyone disappeared. Chapter 1645. Yen Du and the others were lifted up by the brilliance, yet their bodies instead had a feeling of swiftly falling down. After that, the sun, moon, and stars in the sky seemed to be swiftly flying, drawing out numerous rays of light, and when they arrived at their limits, everything seemed to have frozen. Not only the outside world, but they also realized that their bodies could not move at all. In fact, apart from being able to move their divine wills and think, even their qi dynamic did not have the slightest change. This was no different from being in a real standstill. Lu Jianpain transmitted a message through the divine will, "Elder Yu, do you know what kind of supernatural power this is?" Yu Fu shook his head and replied, "Elder Lu, you think too highly of me. The ability of the true Yang is not something I can guess." Speaking of which, the founder of Mount Qingjue also had such a cultivation level, and naturally had a superior Dao technique. However, no matter how talented the successor was, without the Zhou Huanyuan Jade, it would be impossible for him to reach such a level. Naturally, everyone had no chance to witness the power of the true Yang. As for the primordial demons in Bushitian, their exit was blocked by the restrictive spell, and the doppelgangers were blocked by the glazed crystal. Therefore, their understanding of this level of cultivation was not direct, and they could only get a glimpse of it from the records of the past. The four of them spoke a few more words before they felt their bodies stop moving, and the surrounding scenery changed. They noticed that they'd arrived at an expanse of ruins in the Forgotten City, whereas Bo Bai and Bo Xian had already vanished without a trace. Because the qi dynamic around them did not diminish at all, they did not know how much time had passed. They looked at the arrangement of the stars, and then calculated silently for a moment. However, they were surprised to find that only a moment had passed since just now. After knowing this, the four of them could not help but feel a little incredulous. Just now felt like a long time had passed, and they did not know if their senses were wrong, or if heaven and earth had really stopped for a long time. Lu Jianpain gave it a try and realized that after arriving here, his spiritual vigor seemed to be blocked by something. He could only sense things within a mile. It was better to just observe. Hence, he looked around and said, "We are no longer on the Earth star just now. I wonder where is this place?" Yu Fu looked left and right, his gaze stopping on the ruins for a long time. This type of palace city construction method should have come from Busksa heaven. If I am not mistaken, these ruins should be the Golden Luan sect palace that enlightened masters were pursued back then. Qian He gazed into the distance and realized that apart from some dragon monsters that he had never seen before, there was no one else nearby. He asked, "Why did the two high venerables bring me here?" Yen Du reached out and touched the mystic crystal hidden in his sleeve. After pondering for a while, he said, "This venerable lord wouldn't do meaningless things. He must have some purpose." Qian He said, "Since that's the case, Mountain Chieftain, why don't we split up and search?" Yen Du thought about it and nodded in agreement. The four of them split up and searched. After a short while, they found something. As the conveyance lights landed, they gathered in front of a palace city that was still in good condition. Qian He said, "Mountain Chieftain, this palace city is the only place here that is still in good condition. The restriction on the door seems to be the Golden Luan sect's eroded runes. We might be able to break it and take a look inside." Lu Jianping found it troublesome and said, "There's no need for that. We can just go in directly." This level of restriction might be able to stop the enlightened master of the heavenly abode and ordinary mortal metamorphosis cultivators, but they were all enlightenment realm cultivators. It was very easy for them to enter. Yen Du reached out to stop him. He turned around and said, "Elder Yu, can you break it?" Yu Fu pondered for a moment before taking out a jade slip and looking at it, and then he said, "It's not difficult. When we annihilated the Golden Phoenix sect all those years ago, we'd broken through many of these restrictions, and we'd even entered some secret treasuries." Yen Du said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Elder Yu." Yu Fu closed his eyes and calculated in his mind for a long time. Then he shot out a ray of spiritual light and nailed it on the door. Suddenly, the restriction there flowed like water and quietly disappeared. Then, the door rumbled open, revealing a path that led to the inside. Yen Du saw this and took the lead. The other three followed behind. However, as soon as they entered, the door behind them closed with a rumbling sound. However, no one paid any attention to it and continued deeper in. After passing through another door, they saw a jade phoenix statue standing there. Lu Jianping snorted and said with disdain, "Golden Luan." Qian He said in a low voice, "Although I destroyed the Golden Luan sect, this demon bird used its supernatural power to escape. Our Qingjue mountain is no longer able to stop this person. I think it won't be long before it comes out to stir up trouble again." Yen Du said in a low voice, "No matter what, we must find a way to stop this person." Qian He and the others nodded silently. The four of them walked around the jade statue and continued forward. They passed by another empty hall, but when they reached this place, they were all shocked. There was a high platform here, and there was a picture on the jade wall in front of them. A young Taoist dressed in a black robe stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. However, his back was facing them, so they could not see his appearance. They could not sense the other person's qi. When they probed with their consciousness, it was as if they had entered a bottomless hole. It seemed that if they continued, they would fall into it as well. They immediately understood that this person was probably Yuan Venerate Jinyang, who was on the same level as their ancestral master and was an almighty who could compete with connate fiendish demons. They had traversed the void to come here just to find this person. Looking at the figure, everyone's heart unconsciously surged with a sense of respect and hope. Yen Du suppressed the excitement in his heart and was about to go forward to pay his respects when he heard a clear voice coming from below. "Do you recognize this picture?" He was stunned and looked up. Just now, he had not looked at it in detail, and only now did he see that it was a picture of an immortal imparting the Tao. However, when he saw Doran's appearance on the picture, his heart trembled and he cried out, This is the picture of our Grandmaster?" Qian He and the other two were also shocked. They had never thought that the picture of their Grandmaster would appear here. The voice spoke again. "So this is the Grandmaster of your noble sect? May I know where your Grandmaster is now?" Yen Du replied sadly, "Due to an incident, he passed away long ago." "I see." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He turned around slowly and revealed a handsome face. His eyes were filled with divine light as he looked down. Yen Du hurriedly lowered his head and bowed, saying, "Mountain Master Yen Du of Mount Qingjue greets the Overlord." The three elders behind him also bowed in unison. Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoists, please rise." Yen Du straightened up, but he did not dare to look too much. After all, It was the first time he had seen such a powerful being. His heart was unusually tense, and he did not dare to do anything out of line. Zhang Yan said, "Mountain Master Yen and the others said that they were guided here by someone. May I know who it was?" Yen Du answered honestly, "That person's supernatural power is unfathomable, and we do not know his background." Zhang Yan was clear that he had touched the jade ball in the Ling Kong world previously, so there was a karmic connection. There was no need to investigate who guided this person. If they were on the same path, they would eventually meet again. Moreover, even if the people of Mount Qingjue did not come looking for him, he would still take the initiative to send Zhuahang's body back for the karmic connection of the past. He said, "Mountain Master Yen, you must have a reason for coming to find me. Why don't you tell me your purpose?" Yen Du bowed respectfully again. This time, he did not dare to hide anything anymore. He sighed and said, "I came from Bu Su Tian, but now this ancestral continent has been occupied by some innate demons." Zhang Yan said plainly, "I have heard about this." Yen Du bowed slightly and said, "Those innate demons are our greatest enemies. After they occupied Bu Su Tian, our Grandmaster sacrificed himself to form a prohibition to prevent them from harming the human path. Our Mount Qingjue has also followed the Grandmaster's orders and has always blocked the door, fighting with the demons under their command. However, 1,000,000 years have passed, and the prohibition is gradually loosening. We are no longer able to withstand it. In the previous battle, the previous generation and the great cultivators of the sect died in battle. Only the 4 of us and a few disciples escaped. Hence, we crossed the void primordial sea to find a great Shinran to worship and lead us to continue resisting the demons and protect the human path." Zhang Yan said, "So, this Golden Luan sect is the subordinate of those innate demons?" Yen Du replied, "That's right. This sect was destroyed by Qingjue Mountain a long time ago. Many sects like this have been destroyed in the past 1,000,000 years, but—" He looked at the Immortal's Tao imparting painting with some doubts and said, "This person and I are enemies. I wonder why the painting of my sect's founder would appear here." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He already knew the reason, but there was no need to explain it now. He said, "According to Mountain Master Yen, the Grandmaster of your Mount Qingjue should be from Bu Su Tian. You must have acquaintances. Why don't you go and seek refuge with them?" Yen Du sighed and said, "I dare not lie to the great Shinran. Back then, the Grandmaster invited a few of us to fight together, but there were only a few who responded. When I arrived at the great Shinran's place, I paid a visit to a great Shinran, but he was unwilling to pay attention to us. Later on, it was that person who guided us. Just now we are here." After saying this, he was anxious, afraid that the great Shinran in front of him would also reject them outside the door. Zhang Yan could not help but ponder. In all fairness, the Grandmaster of Mount Qingjue's actions were very admirable. Regardless, this person had after all stopped those innate demons for 1,000,000 years. Now, among the heavens and the 10,000 worlds, all the sects that were still flourishing at the moment would undoubtedly owe him a favor. The innate demons occupied the land of innate spiritual splendor, controlled the Zhou Huanyuan jade, and blocked the path of almost all the human path cultivators. Even if they did not come looking for him, when he was successful in his cultivation, he would still come looking for them, even if the cultivators of Mount Qingjue did not come looking for him. But now was not the time. Not to mention that he knew nothing about those innate demons, he could not control his mana at will, so it could be said that the time was not right. As for why those of the same generation did not make a move, there might be a reason behind it, but it was not within his consideration. Every true young cultivator was under the control of Yuan Zun, and he would not care what they thought of him as he did things. However, there was still one more thing that was worth asking. With a thought, 5-colored brilliance appeared behind him, instantly lighting up the hall. He said, "Do you recognize this cultivation method?" Chapter 1646. Yen Du and the others looked up and saw that the 5-colored light was like smoke. It seemed to be mixed together, but it was also distinct. After looking at it for a while, they felt dizzy and could no longer look up. He thought about it for a while, then bowed and apologized. He turned around and discussed with Yu Fu and the others in a low voice. After a while, he bowed again and said, reporting to the overlord, this technique seems to be somewhat similar to that of Qingjue Mountain, but that is only on the surface. They are not the same, and I have never seen it before. Zhang Yan's eyes moved slightly. Never seen it before. Just now, he was displaying the 5 directions 5 elements Taishan True Light, and not the Taishan True technique that he had deduced. Naturally, with his current cultivation, even the simplest technique would have the power to destroy heaven and earth. However, the essence of the technique did not change much. When Zhou Chongju passed this technique to him, he said that it was obtained from the ancient Taishan sect. As his cultivation deepened, he did not find out the whereabouts of this sect. Later, when he saw the golden body that Zhuo Hong had transformed into, and the techniques that he had left behind, he guessed that they might be related, and so he asked. However, he could see that Yen Du and the others did not hide anything. They really thought that this technique was not the same as what they had learned. He couldn't help but think about it. From the looks of it, there were 3 possibilities. The first was that this person was related to the legendary Taishan, but he only inherited some of the techniques from the sect and not all of them. Second, there was no relationship between the two. Third, under the influence of some kind of Weili, there was a change in his memory. Before the fated chance came, he would never be able to return to the right path. If that was the case, then even he could not see the real inside story. However, this time he was just trying to ask. He did not expect to get an answer. Since there was no result before him, then he would solve it in the future. After he thought about it, he temporarily suppressed this probing thought. Seeing that he was silent, Yen Du and the others began to discuss in the will of God. Lu Jianping said, Mountain Chieftain, I don't know what this revered lord means. Yen Du said calmly, don't be anxious. A battle with a Khanate demon is a huge matter. If it was anyone else, they would have to consider it carefully. It's not strange that the exalted lord did not respond at this moment. Yu Fu said, since we've brought our sect's treasure, there's no harm in handing it over. Lu Jianping said anxiously, since the Venerable One hasn't agreed, how can we take it out? Yen Du pondered for a moment and said, I agree with Elder Yu's opinion. Although this Venerable One hasn't agreed, I can see that he's very different from the Yuan Zun I know. At least he's willing to listen to me, so there's a possibility that he'll agree. Besides, this item is useless to us, so we might as well let him know our sincerity. Lu Jianping still wanted to say something, but Yu Fu interjected, Elder Lu, could it be that you've forgotten what I said earlier? This item isn't that easy to obtain. I'm only afraid that this person won't be willing to accept it. Lu Jianping was startled. He thought about it again and did not object. Yen Du then asked Qian He, Elder Qian, what do you think? Qian He said, this matter is up to the Hill Master. After the 4 of them discussed, they retreated from the spirit. Yen Du bowed and said, Venerable One, this time I came out, I've brought a treasure from Qingjue Mountain. This was brought out from Bu Su Tian by our founding master. Those demons are also coveting it, but no one can use it. This time, I'm willing to offer it to you, Venerable One. Zhang Yan chuckled as he could tell what was going on. However, he didn't ask about the treasure. Instead, he asked, in that case, those Khanate fiendish demons are still watching you? Yen Du replied, I dare not hide it from you, Venerable One. Even if those demons aren't after this treasure, they won't let us go. Zhang Yan asked again, what did you rely on to hide from the Khanate demons' prying eyes? Yen Du and the others replied, our founding master once bestowed a mystic crystal. This item can be used to expel the distracting thoughts and qi dynamic of the mighty people of True Yang. It can also prevent them from prying and protect my body and spirit. However, this item has been used for almost 1,000,000 years. Now, there's only a little left. Maybe in another 100 or 200 years, it will disappear. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. This period was also the day when the mystic stone of Luo Monastery's original mystic stone ended. It seemed like it was just as he had predicted, something would happen at that time. After thinking for a while, he said, "Just now, you guys have said that you transmigrated here to find someone to defend against the demons and protect the human path. However, I think your real purpose is not just this. Maybe you still want to take back Bu Su Tian." Yen Du hurriedly said, "We don't dare to have such an extravagant hope. It's enough that we don't harm the human path." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "You guys don't have to deny it. In reality, this is the same thing. Bu Su Tian was taken from the hands of the human cultivators by those innate demons. These people will also be on guard against the human cultivators taking back this place one day. There will be a victor between the two. If we don't take back this world and only think about how to defend against these people, then there will never be a chance. This is a battle of life and death. There is no way out. They are like this, and so am I." Hearing him say this, Yen Du faintly looked forward to it. He lowered his voice and raised his head slightly. He asked slowly, "Then, I wonder what the Venerable One thinks." Zhang Yan's gaze fell and said, "Mountain Chieftain Yen, just now, you mentioned that no one is willing to help you. I can tell you now." He paused for a moment and said in a clear voice, "If others don't help, I will help. If others don't want to, I will do it." After this voice fell, it reverberated in the hall for a long time. Yen Du and the other three were shocked. They looked up, their eyes full of surprise and excitement. Before coming here, they actually didn't have much hope in their hearts. Now that they heard it with their own ears, they still couldn't believe it. They looked at each other and bowed deeply to the stage. Zhang Yan said, "The innate demons are also wily. To fight with them, we need to think about it. The time is not right now. My friends, you can cultivate here. You don't have to worry about others coming to find you. Besides, I still have many things to ask you." Regarding Bu Su Tian, he still had limited knowledge. Although Fu Qingming had said some things before, he had deliberately cut off his consciousness to prevent enemies from chasing after him. There were some parts that were unclear. Qingju Mountain was originally a sect in Bu Su Tian, so they should have a more detailed understanding. Moreover, he was also very interested in the Yuan Zun. Now that he was alone in his cultivation, there were many parts that were a little unclear. If there was a need, he could exchange pointers with them. Yen Du replied, "Whatever the Great Holiness asks, we will tell you everything we know. This time, we have also brought the records of our sect, and we wish to offer them to the Great Holiness." Actually, he'd already memorized everything recorded on the bamboo slip. However, he understood that some things had different meanings in the eyes of different people, especially some of the jade slips that were recorded by the founding ancestor. In the eyes of the disciples below, the jade slips might seem ordinary, but in the eyes of those of the same generation, they might be able to see more. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Mountain Chieftain Yen, this place is called the Mountain and Sea Realm. With my vitality entrusted to it, spiritual opportunity flourishes everywhere. Since the disciples of Qingju Mountain are here, why don't you choose one of the many heavenly stars to live in?" Yen Du said gratefully, "Thank you for your concern, Great Holiness." He thought for a moment and said, "Just now, the place we have been to is not bad. If it's possible, let's go there." Zhang Yan smiled. In just a moment, the scenery around them suddenly changed. Unexpectedly, they were once again on the Earth star that they had come from just now. Yen Du looked around and couldn't help but be amazed. In an instant, the space realm had changed. This kind of method was much more superior than the magical power that had brought them here just now. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Great Holiness, please wait for a moment. The secret books and records passed down by the Patriarch are still in the Dermic boat. Let us take them out." He turned to Elder Yu and said, "Great Holiness, please wait for a moment. The secret books and records passed down by the Patriarch are still in the Dermic boat. Let us take them out." Yen Du took 2 steps forward and held up the 2 jade boxes. He said, "Great Holiness, these 2 jade boxes contain the books and records. The other contains the treasures passed down by the Patriarch. The previous mountain chieftain had instructed us to give these treasures to the person who is willing to fight against the demons. Now that the Great Holiness has agreed to this matter, we will naturally present them to him. Zhang Yan nodded. Since he had decided to fight against the Khanate demons, there was no need to refuse anything that could improve his strength. He waved his sleeve and accepted the boxes. He planned to go back and take a closer look at them. He called out in his heart. A spiritual light shot down from the sky and turned into a 7 or 8-year-old boy. He bowed to him and said, "Greetings, Hall Chieftain." Zhang Yan said to Yen Du, "This is the Earth Star Array Spirit. If Mountain Chieftain Yen has anything to say, you can talk to him." Yen Du quickly said, "We thank the Great Holiness for taking care of us. We are truly grateful." After Zhang Yan gave his instructions, he did not say anything else. He changed his mind and disappeared. Yen Du stood there and looked at the vast sky. He sighed in his heart. After a while, he just now turned around and said, "Elder Yu, since we have a place to stand, please remove the prohibition on the disciples. I didn't expect that there would still be people who are willing to accept us in the primordial sea of void. Our Qingjue mountain will finally have an unbroken legacy." Yu Fu acknowledged and went to the boat to arrange the disciples. Lu Jianping walked over and saw that Yen Du was deep in thought. He asked, "What are you thinking about, Hill Chieftain?" Yen Du raised his head and looked at him. He said, "It might be disrespectful to say this, but I am thinking about the background of this Yuan Zun." Lu Jianping said, "Hill Chieftain, are you thinking about the origin of the Zhou Huanyuan jade?" Yen Du nodded and said, "Now it seems that this person has nothing to do with the other Yuan Zun. However, to be able to cultivate the Zhou Huanyuan jade, he might have learned it from one of the almighty ancestors of Bu Su Tian." Lu Jianping said disapprovingly, "Maybe so, but so what? The patriarch's friends are not only familiar with each other, but they are also from Bu Su Tian. However, when the time comes, they don't care about anything. They only care about their own safety. But this person, who has nothing to do with our Qingjue mountain, is willing to lend a hand and protect our Tao. With this great holiness around, why should we care about this person?" Yen Du shook his head. The Khanate demons were powerful. He thought that as long as they were willing to fight together, no matter what they did in the past, they could put down their prejudices. At this moment, he could not help but think of the young man who had guided them to the mountain and sea realm. He did not know who this person was, and whether he would come here as well. Chapter 1647. Zhang Yan left Su Tiandi Star and returned to Tianqing Hall. When he arrived at the cave abode, he placed the 2 jade boxes on the table. He waved his sleeves and opened one of the jade boxes. There was a jade bag in it. He felt the spiritual opportunity on it and put his thoughts into it. In an instant, rays of spiritual light gushed out and turned into glazed jade slips in midair. There were thousands of them, but they were still sparse in the spacious hall. He looked up, and wherever he looked at the jade slip, words and sceneries would immediately appear there. Yen Du once said that many of these were the handwritten records of the founding master of Qingjue Mountain. In that case, he thought that the divine will of the past must have been left behind. If he could find it, he only needed to use his clairvoyance to enter and have a long talk with it. If he was lucky, he might be able to understand most things. However, after looking around, he did not find the divine will of the person. He thought for a while and roughly guessed the reason. For example, Fu Qingming had set up a contingency plan in the Yuhuan heavens even though he knew that a calamity was about to befall him. On the other hand, this sacrificial seal had taken the initiative to do so. Perhaps it was the same. In that case, it made sense that the divine will could not be found. Perhaps it was to prevent people with evil intentions from finding its whereabouts through this method. It was not good to tell this to the disciples, because it would be extremely easy to be exposed. If that was the case, then there was no need to look for it. It would be to guard against cultivators of the same generation. After he gave up on this idea, he looked through the rest of the bamboo slips to see if there were any records of the heaven-toppling change in the past. If he could understand the past, then he would be able to have a clear understanding of the entire matter. Unfortunately, after looking through them, there was no such content. He thought about it again and thought that the founding master of Qingjue Mountain might have deliberately avoided talking about it, or maybe he did not know the real reason behind it. As he continued to look, another question that he was concerned about was what kind of magical powers the Khanate demons had. There was also little mention of them. Thinking about it carefully, this was actually normal. When the founding master of Qingjue Mountain wrote these bamboo slips, the Khanate demons had not yet occupied Busu heaven. Naturally, they would not have written too much. As for after that, they probably did not have the mood to do this anymore. Because they were not true young powerful beings, even if they knew, it would be useless. Instead, if they paid too much attention, these demons might sense it. Once there was no one to restrain them, they might come looking for them. This was not nonsense. Back then, Fu Qingming had voluntarily given up a part of his consciousness in order not to be discovered by his enemies. However, it did not matter. At least, through Yen Du and the others, he learned about the whereabouts of the cultivators. He could learn more about them in the future. In general, most of the jade slips recorded the local customs of Busu heaven. It was not that they were worthless, but they were not very helpful to him. However, as the saying goes, lose at sunrise, gain at sunrise. As he did not want to miss any clues, almost every jade slip was filled with divine will, looking at the shadow of the past. Because of this, he found a lot of cultivation methods in the true Yang realm in one jade slip, as well as some of the records of the founding master of Qingjue Mountain talking to his peers about Tao. There were also some of his own experiences. These should have been left for the future disciples. However, without Zhou Huanyuan jade, the path to Jin Kingdom had long been cut off. If he had not seen it today, it could only be left there as a decoration. After looking through it, many things that he had been puzzled about in the past suddenly became clear. Just as I thought, the path from now on is to subdue the mana. As for the next step, so it is like this. Combining what he saw here and his own exploration in the past, he no longer had any doubts in his heart. Here, the incarnation felt it, and the real body knew it as well. He could feel that the flow of mana was slightly smoother than before, and he believed that there would be greater progress in the near future. He did not delve too deeply into it. The things inside needed to be studied carefully, and it was not something that could be understood in a short period of time. Hence, he kept this jade slip by itself and put the other jade slips back into the jade box. Only then did he look to the other side. This jade box was the treasure of Qingjue Mountain that Yen Du had mentioned. Because he did not know what it was, and what power it had, he did not rashly open it. Instead, he moved his mind, and his body appeared in a deserted world. The space of this world was also within his chi dynamic, and there were no living creatures, so he was not afraid of anyone coming to disturb him. If something happened, even if this world was destroyed, it would not affect the other worlds. He picked up the jade box, and with a wave of his sleeve, the lid of the box was opened. However, when he looked at it, there was nothing inside. His expression was normal, and there was no surprise. He only looked at it attentively, and gradually, a jade plate appeared in front of him. It was about the size of a palm, and it was white and flawless. Looking at its shape, it was exactly the same as what Daoren was holding in his hand in the mural. This treasure did not exist in the present world, or rather, it did not only exist in the present world, but had fallen into the will of the gods. Only a true yang cultivator could follow the trace of chi dynamic and find its original location. Even if a cultivator of the lower state obtained this jade box, it would be useless, as they could not even come into contact with it. Moreover, it would be impossible to control such a treasure. He could turn illusions into reality, or rather, every Xinjiang cultivator could do it. However, the method of imparting was different. He did not know if it was the way the treasure was supposed to be, or if it was a trick of the Grandmaster of Qingjue Mountain. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the jade disc. His mana probed into it. At this moment, it was as if he was immersed in a ball of dense and viscous chi activity. He tried to stir up the mystery, but it did not stir up any waves. Therefore, he tried to increase his mana, but after a while, the chi dynamic within the jade plate suddenly became violent, like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins, running wildly. No matter what he did, he could not calm it down, let alone activate the treasure further. After trying a few more methods, he realized that none of them were of much use, so he withdrew his consciousness from the jade plate and started to think. On the surface, it seemed that only by restraining his mana could he tame the majestic whaley within the jade plate. However, he had a feeling that this wasn't just a problem with his own Whaley. Instead, the treasure seemed to be lacking somewhere, causing it to be unable to display its true function. It was even to the extent that he couldn't clearly see what kind of power it possessed. However, he could be sure that this had nothing to do with the inheritance of martial arts, and was purely due to the treasure itself. He thought to himself, I wonder if the founding master of Mount Qingjue was able to use this treasure back then. It's a pity that I can't find any relevant records in the Jade Scroll. Actually, he had another thought. Perhaps this treasure did not originally belong to Mount Qingjue, but the founding master had obtained it from somewhere else. This was highly possible, or else the Khanate demon would not have coveted it. He took another look and put the jade plate back into the will of God. Although this treasure was in his hands, it could not be of any use at the moment. However, he had enough patience to slowly unravel the mysteries within. However, the Khanate demon might come looking for him because of this. Although this might not happen, it was always good to be prepared. Because of the various objects in Mount Qingjue, he could already see the heavens realm where the Mount Qingjue cultivators had stopped. Now, he quietly sensed it and found that it seemed to be blocking a gap in a certain door. Endless evil qi was rushing out from that gap. Although it had not been completely broken, it would not last for long. At most, in another 100 years or so, it would completely collapse, and by then the entire heavens realm would no longer exist. Once the restrictive formation is gone, Busu will no longer have any obstacles in front of him. I don't know where he will go next, so I need to find a way to understand his movements. However, if I go with my incarnation, the collision of qi will be extremely easy for the Khanate demon to detect. Ordinary people will not be able to do much if they go. He thought for a moment and quickly came up with an idea. With a turn of his mind, he returned to the Green Sky Hall and sat on the cattail hassock. Then, he concentrated and thought. After a while, a ball of qi appeared out of thin air and slowly rotated there. He could vaguely make out the shape of a Rui scepter. It was originally very blurry, but as his mind gradually landed, it became more and more real. After about 10 days, it was completely presented in front of him. He reached out and took it. He raised his finger and tapped it lightly. Immediately, a clear sound was heard, and he nodded subconsciously. This Rui scepter was created out of thin air by his mind, and he imbued it with a huge amount of divine will. This item was slightly different from the mystical crystal that Mount Qingjue used. If a cultivator carried it with him, it would not kill the incarnation of a true yang cultivator's qi of qi, but it could avoid being seen. However, if it encountered the real body of a demon, it would not be able to defend against it unless he continued to maintain it with qi of vitality. After doing this, he summoned with his mind. After a short while, a gust of chilly wind appeared in the hall. Looking at the blurry figure of a Taoist, he was stunned at first, then came to his senses. He bowed respectfully and said, "This lowly one greets the overlord." Zhang Yan said, "Peng Xiang, I called you here today because I have something for you to do." Peng Xiang said respectfully, "Please give me your orders, overlord." Zhang Yan said, "I need you to head to a world that is about to collapse and keep an eye on the demonic forces there. You need to pay attention. These cultivators are different from the cultivators you've seen before. After you go there, I don't need you to do anything. Just remember what they do and report it to me later." Peng Xiang said, "This lowly one will remember." Zhang Yan loosened his fingers, and the Rui scepter flew in front of him. He said, "This treasure can cover your tracks. Remember not to leave it for even a moment, or else I won't be able to protect you." Peng Xiang caught the Rui scepter. Once it was in his hands, he immediately knew how to use it. At first, he was afraid that he would not be able to send out more doppelgangers, but now he knew that he was worrying too much. This treasure could also be divided into thousands, and it would not hinder him at all. After keeping it, he bowed again and said, "This lowly one will not let you down, Zhenren." Zhang Yan nodded and pointed his finger at the bottom of the stairs. In an instant, a ray of spiritual light covered Peng Xiang, and in an instant he disappeared. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.